a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Star Wars: Shield of Lies. Book 2 of the Black Fleet Crisis Trilogy by Michael P. Kube-McDowell, 1996. Created and read by The Archivist Publishing. Preview. As the year 16 ABY progresses, the New Republic's triumph over the Yavetha grows ever more precarious in the face of an arrogant race bent upon all-out war. Further acts of military aggression by the Yavetha against the defenseless populations of remote worlds along the Outer Rim has led to further political instability within the fledgling government of the New Republic, which begins to fracture under the pressure of this new alien threat. This instability is further exacerbated from within through a campaign of negative propaganda instigated by the Yavetha and targeting the New Republic's leadership, in particular its president, Princess Leia Organa Sola. Whilst the other heroes of the rebellion have been able to successfully move on in the time since the Empire was defeated, the only hero who cannot put aside her burdens is Leia, who, by virtue of her fame, the expectations of others, and her own sense of duty and obligation, has become a prisoner of the presidency. Now she is tired, stressed to her limits, emotionally fragile, and 2 steps away from a profound personal crisis of confidence. As Princess Leia must cope with her personal misgivings as well as the Yavethan threat to the fragile alliance that binds together the New Republic, Lando Calrissian has become a prisoner aboard what seems to be an unpiloted, runaway spacecraft of unknown origin. The mysterious starship, which lurked in deep space and fled from all contact, was thought to either hold the key to advanced technologies, which could secure the New Republic's future, or a devastating force intent upon orchestrating the New Republic's destruction. Lando and his team must now unlock the secrets of this mysterious spacecraft before their oxygen and power is exhausted. For Lando and his team, their very lives depend upon his ability to gamble against the odds by outwitting the sentience controlling the Telchcon Vagabond, without knowing if the alien craft is being controlled by a mysterious sentient species on board or an equally mysterious advanced artificial intelligence inherent to the ship itself. Luke continues his quest to learn more about his mother whilst she was amongst the Falinasi, during which his every belief about the use of the Force continues to be challenged, while his quest, together with the self-proclaimed Falinasi, Akana, was originally focused on her home world of Lukazek. The 2 of them are now desperately seeking any sign of the Falinasi across multiple worlds. As their quest becomes more futile, Luke begins to discover that Akana's story is unraveling as quickly as he is losing confidence in her intentions. Meanwhile, in an effort to discover the secrets of the Yevothan fleet's advanced technologies and provide the Republic Navy with an advantage against overwhelming odds, Han Solo now pilots a spy ship into the heart of Yevothan space and faces a vast fleet of advanced warships under the command of Nil Spar, its ruthless leader. A Yevothan fleet which is much more than a match for any of the New Republic's forces. Part 1. Lando. Chapter 1.
The Talchkon vagabond was on the run once more, but this time there were hitchhikers aboard.
Hyperspace.
C-3PO echoed in a dismayed tone as he struggled to free himself. The droid's limbs were tangled up with Lobot, R2-D2, and the equipment sled in one corner of the vagabond's airlock, a chamber that had suddenly become a space-going prison.
You must be mistaken, Master Lobot.
"I am not mistaken," said Lobot, pushing a flailing golden leg away from his faceplate. "All my data links terminated at the same moment, in exactly the same manner I associate with a hyperspace jump."
There was a course change, too, during the acceleration.
Lando said from the opposite corner of the lock. He flexed his ungloved right hand, trying to drive the bone-chilling cold from his aching fingers.
Master Lando,
C-3PO cried in his most plaintive voice.
can't you make it stop?
I didn't make it start, 3PO.
Lando snapped.
With all respect, Master Lando, you most certainly did.
3PO said huffily.
Now you must reach back into that hole and do whatever you did. And quickly, too. Colonel Pakpiket will be most upset with us for running off with his starship.
Colonel Pakpiket is probably inventing new words in Hortek right now.
Said Lando.
But at least he's on a ship that he can boss. We're not. Any damage over there? Lobot, R2-D2?
The little astromech droid emerged from the jumble of bodies and chirped once.
R2-D2 reports that all of his systems are operational,
said 3PO. I'm uninjured, Lando, said Lobot. My suit took the impact of the equipment sled, but my data links are still all down, and I'm finding it disorienting. Lando nodded.
R2, can you help Lobot out?
Rotating in midair with the aid of his microthrusters, the droid chittered disagreeably.
Don't be rude,
3PO chided.
What's going on?
Master Lando. R2 says he prefers to keep his systems private.
Yeah, well, I don't like telepaths either, R2.
Said Lando.
But I'd sure like to be able to think at the Colonel right now. Give Lobot a link to your event log. There might be something in there we can use to figure out what happened. Does anyone see my right glove?
Lobot was clinging with one hand to the equipment sled. I think your glove blew out the airlock in the decompression.
Just perfect.
Lando looked at his purpled hand, then at the inflated wrist cuff that was keeping his suit sealed.
What's the pressure in here now?
640 millibars, said Lobot. Repressurization began after the entry sealed.
Repressurization? That's interesting. From where?
Lando craned his head and looked at the seamless, featureless bulkheads.
R2, see if you can find the vents.
The droid acknowledged the order with a beep and rose to begin cruising along the bulkheads at close range.
All right. Here's the way it looks to me,
said Lando.
We're no longer invited guests and welcome visitors. She shook off Lady Luck and tried to spit us out. Probably would have succeeded if she hadn't been trying to run away from the task force at the same time.
Which raises a question, said Lobot. Why didn't she know?
I'm listening.
It appears to be a misjudgment. 2 defense routines were activated without consideration of their combined effect. The repressurization of this compartment appears to be another inconsistency.
Do you have an explanation?
These events suggest to me that the ship is either under the control of systems with limited intelligence, or under the control of beings with limited intelligence. When he saw Lando's expression, Lobot added, "At this point, it's not possible to distinguish between those possibilities."
Maybe if we figure that out, we'll know something that can help us get on top here,
said Lando.
I'm sure of this much. That lock closed because of the jump, not as any favor to us. We're not wanted here. And if we're not clear of this compartment by the time the vagabond leaves hyperspace, I don't think too much of our chances.
Master Lando, I am certain Colonel Packbiget and the Armada are pursuing us,
said 3PO.
The sooner we leave hyperspace, the sooner they can rescue us.
Yeah, they're going to be looking for us,
said Lando.
But finding us, we could pop out 5 light years from where we were, or 50, or 500, and normal evasive tactics would call for an immediate course change, then another jump. Once that happens, you might as well be playing hide-and-seek with the Ewoks on Endor.
Master Lando, there must be some way they can rescue us. Surely they wouldn't abandon us. If they do not come for us, we are all doomed to perish as prisoners, lost in space.
3PO, we can't afford to wait for them.
Lando tapped his faceplate to remind the droid why.
The chrono's already moving. Lobot and I could be dead before this ship even decides to leave hyperspace. That's why we have to act now. We can't count on any help from the Armada unless we can figure out some way to give them some help finding us first. Until then, we're on our own.
3PO raised his arms and his voice together.
We apologize.
He called to the ship.
Please believe me, I never meant to harm anyone.
Shut up, 3PO.
Yes, sir.
Lando, said Lobot.
What?
It couldn't hurt, said Lobot. Someone might be listening. Lando frowned.
As far as this ship is concerned, we're pirates, burglars, tomb robbers, or worse. Not too likely they'll forget that, just because we suddenly develop better manners after breaking down the front door.
The probability of success may be low, said Lobot, but diplomatic words are the tool 3PO is best equipped to wield, and perhaps an apology will prove to be the key that will open the next door. Sighing, Lando waved his gloved hand toward C-3PO.
All right, but 3PO, a little dignity, please.
Of course, Master Lando.
The droid said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone.
I am programmed to conduct myself in a dignified manner at all times. Why? It's one of the fundamental principles of etiquette and protocol.
All right.
Lando said, cutting him short.
Just get to it. We have no idea how much time we have. Use the secondary comm channel so Lobot and I can still hear each other.
Very well, Master Lando.
3PO said, then seemingly fell silent.
Lobot, you have access to R2's event log?
Yes, Lando.
See if you can figure out our new heading from his gyro and accelerometer readings leading up to the jump. Maybe that plus R2's astrographic database can tell us something about how much time we have.
New Republic ferret IX-26 came out of hyperspace close enough to its destination for the planet to fill most of the forward view screen. Check the coordinates, Craddock Stopa ordered, frowning. Absolute reference. The astrogator says 44, 196, 210. The pilot spun the index wheel on the ship's log with a swipe of his palm. Yeah, that's what you gave me. Those numbers came directly from the Third General Survey. Stopa pointed at the astrogation display. But if I'm reading your board correctly, it says that this planet is Maltha Obex. That's a Tobek name. The pilot cocked his head toward the astrogator. Maltha Obex, that's right. Stopa, expedition chief for the Abroan Institute's mission to Kala, shook his head as he studied the data coming from IX-26's sensors. My stars! What happened here? Glancing up at the view screen, the pilot said, "Why, what do you mean? Looks just like 10,000 other ice balls." Josala Kren, the other half of the Abroan expedition, moved forward from her station. "That's just it. The 3GS survey mission reported this as a temperate world. It had a population of 7 million and a primary ecosystem rated provisionally at complexity 2. Shaking his head, the pilot said dryly, "We must have missed the summer season." "That was expected," Stopa said. "When the 3GS contact mission came here, they found a third of the landmass glaciated." He left unspoken that the contact team had found the planet dead, the Kella civilization in ruins. "When the Tobak came, they must have thought this world was theirs for the taking and gave it a claiming name," said Josala. "What difference does the name make? This is where you wanted to be, right? What am I missing?" "The last 3GS contact was 158 years ago," Stopa said. "The planet should have begun its recovery by now." "I still don't see the problem." "Yes, you do," Josala said. "The problem's all we can see. The problem is the ice." "Try me again?" Josala sighed. "Where'd you pick us up?" "Babali," the pilot said. "Wait, you don't have ice drills? Snow shelter? Cold suits?" "Babali's a tropical dig. For some reason, ice drills weren't on the equipment list," said Josala wryly. "Our rover isn't even rated for this kind of weather." The pilot whistled sympathetically. "Now I see the problem. But why'd they send you, then?" "We were the best solution to a two-variable equation," said Josala. "The nearest bioarchaeologist and the fastest available transportation." "It is not all bad," Stopa said thoughtfully. "We were sent here to recover biological samples. The glaciation virtually ensures that good samples still exist to be recovered." "Unless what triggered this climatic episode was a dirty war, with incendiaries or surface-burst weapons," Josala pointed out. "Not much atmosphere left, but I can drop a probe to take a sniff," said the pilot. "We ought to be able to settle that question pretty quickly." "No," said Stopa. "Put us in a mapping orbit. Let's have a look at the other side. We only need one landing site, a few grams of material. There could be a geothermal field, or some other sort of hot spot. A warm current from a deep vent, perhaps, that kept a portion of some seacoast ice-free. If so, surely the Kella would have fled there before the end." "You don't expect to find anyone alive, do you? Look at the surface temperature readings." "No, not alive," Stopa said. "But I would be grateful for a single corpse that is not buried under 300 meters of ice." "Mapping orbit it is," said the pilot, reaching for the controls. "Maltha Obex, here we come." "Kella," Josala amended quietly. "If at least a little bit of this planet doesn't still belong to the Kella, we're going to be a big disappointment to the folks who sent us here." From the close vantage of a standard mapping orbit, Kella's face proved no more inviting. The land was blanketed in ice to a depth of up to a kilometer, while the shrunken oceans, too salty to freeze, were thick with bergs and growlers. "That's it," said Stopa, studying the data from the final pass. "Some of the Kella might have tried to live on the ice. We might get lucky and find their remains only 50 or 100 meters down. It's something we can work on while we're waiting for reinforcements, but we have to assume the worst and call for help." "Maybe we can get Dr. Eccles's team," said Josala. "They were supposed to be finished with the Hoth excavation by now." "We can try. Open a hypercom link to the Obroan Institute," Stopa said. "Ready," said the pilot. "This is Dr. Craddock Stopa. Verification code Alpha Eager 442. I want supply and dispatch in on this call. Done. Go ahead, Doctor. I have an urgent requisition for additional equipment and staff for my current assignment. Stopa quickly rattled off the detailed list he had composed. Have all that? Supply here? I haven't. We'll get working on it right away. We also need a crack cold sight team out here. Is Dr. Eccles' Hoth crew available? They reported back yesterday. I don't know what their status is, said the dispatcher. But I'll send this up to the committee right away and get you an answer pronto. Assuming that they are available, what's your best estimate of when we see them and the gear out here? If we can push the turnaround on Penga Rift and get the team and gear aboard by midnight, you're looking at 16 standard days. Add on hour for any delays getting off. Is anything faster than Penga Rift available? Not under Institute registry, sorry. Explore other options, Stopa said shortly. This has the highest priority. Stopa out. He signaled the pilot to end the link. Now, you'd better get me Krengish at New Republic Intelligence. They need to know there'll be a delay getting them what they asked for. There was little talking among the quartet trapped in the Vagabond's airlock. Everyone had a job to do. R2 searched for the inflow vents, while 3PO made entreaties to the Vagabond's masters. Lobot analyzed the acceleration and astrographic data, while he inventoried the equipment on the equipment sled. And Lando returned to the control handle in the corner of the compartment to see if it would respond to him. The handle proved immovable, and Lando's touch alone elicited no detectable response from the ship. But through his efforts, he realized that his bare hand was puffy, stiff, and aching. The pressure from the wrist collar was compounding the damage done by the decompression.
Do we have any sample bags?
Lando asked, returning to where Lobot and the equipment sled floated. Yes, 6 small, 6 large, and 2 capsules of freeform sheet gel.
The bags, they're self-sealing, right?
Yes, Lando. He paused. I'm sorry. I don't have any more information. Do amnesiacs know that there are things they cannot remember? If so, then I know how it feels to have amnesia. What I know best is making links and browsing for information. I do not seem to have much other expertise.
Save the self-examination for another time,
said Lando.
Grab one of those small sample bags and see if we can't improvise a mitten for me.
Before long, they managed to attach the mouth of the sample bag above the wrist lock for the missing gauntlet. By squeezing the locking pins, Lando was able to make the wrist cuff relax. Almost immediately, the swelling in his fingers began to subside. I do not know if the bag or the adhesive is strong enough to withstand another depressurization, said Lobot.
I'm not counting on that,
Lando said.
I just don't want to lose consumables or the use of my hand. The odds are bad enough already. Did you get anything out of R2's data?
I believe I have our heading prior to the jump to within half a degree, Lobot said, then rattled off the numbers. I apologize for the imprecision.
That would put us on a course toward Sector 151,
Lando said. Yes, the boundary is 8 light years from our original position.
Is there anyone out in 51 who might be able to help us?
I'm sorry, said Lobot. R2 has navigational data only. There is no geopolitical or sociological data. Lando nodded.
Stop apologizing for what you can't give me. We haven't the time to spare. How far is this road open?
The imprecision of the heading becomes more significant the farther out we look, of course, said Lobot. The nearest body that is close enough to the center flight path and has a large enough gravity shadow to force a ship out of hyperspace is 41.53 light-years away. Frowning, Lando said,
That doesn't help me much. Turn the question around. How far to the spot along this flight path that's the farthest from everything else?
Lobot closed his eyes and concentrated. But the answer came from R2-D2, as a long series of beeps and chirps.
R2 says that in 12.9 light years, this vessel will enter the most isolated region along this flight path.
3PO offered.
At that point, there will be no chartered bodies larger than a Class 5 comet for nearly 9 light years in any direction.
Sounds like a good place to make a course change.
Said Lando.
Far enough out to give us a little time to work with.
But we do not know how fast this vessel is capable of traveling in hyperspace, Lobot pointed out. That region could be 12 hours away, or 8, or 6, or even fewer. The conventional upper limit on hyperspace velocity may be technological rather than theoretical. And there's something else.
What?
If we do clear that gravity shadow 41 light years from here, we'll be heading straight for the border of the New Republic, in the general direction of Fracas, in the core.
All the more reason not to just stand around waiting.
Said Lando.
R2, what did you find?
R2 beeped and 3PO translated.
Master Lando, R2 says that there are no inflow vents anywhere in this chamber.
What? Then how was this chamber repressurized?
According to R2, the atmospheric gases are passing through the bulkheads molecule by molecule. He says that most of the surface area of the compartment is involved.
Let me get this straight. These bulkheads are porous?
R2 chittered, and 3PO offered the answer.
No, Master Lando, R2 says that molecules of gas simply appear on the surface.
Curious, said Lobot. I wonder if the bulkheads could be actually producing the gas.
R2, is there any area that's more involved with this process than the rest?
Asked Lando. The little droid jetted down to the center of the chamber and illuminated a band across the inner bulkhead with a beam of orange light from his holographic projector.
Got it. 3PO, give me a report on your progress.
The golden droid cocked his head.
Sir, so far I have hailed the masters of this vessel in 11,463 languages, offering our abject apologies and asking for their assistance. There has been no reply on any band I am capable of detecting.
Do those 6 million languages of yours happen to include the Kela?
Alas, Master Lando, they do not.
Do you have any information at all about the Kela language? Maybe it's related to some other language you are fluent in. The way that if you know Torak, you can almost get along in Thobek or Wetum.
I am sorry, Master Lando. I am completely at a loss.
What about matching up geographically?
Sir, it is a standard first contact procedure to attempt contact with regional languages when the native languages are known.
3PO said with a note of indignation.
I began with the 873 languages spoken in the sector where Bella is located, and continued with the 3,207 languages with direct links to those linguistic families.
And now you're just going A to Z on the rest?
I am continuing by astrographic proximity.
How long will it take you to try them all?
Master Lando, by reducing the wait time to the minimum specified by my protocols, I will be able to complete the initial series in 4.2 standard days.
That's about what I figured.
Said Lando.
Lobot, dig out the cutting blaster. We're going to have to make our own door.
With a grim expression on his face, Admiral Hiram Drayson sat on the edge of his desk and studied the final contact report from Colonel Pakpakat at Gamir Ascalon. The recordings from the spotter ships were dramatic and alarming. Moments before the Vagabond broke away, a ring of 6 rounded bumps, accumulator nodes or beam radiators, Drayson thought, appeared at the forward end of the ship. A fierce blue light began to dance over the bow. Moments later, twin beams of energy shot out from 2 of the nodes and scissored back through the gap between the Vagabond and Lady Luck, slicing them apart. Another pair of beams knifed out from 2 other nodes and carved through the interdiction generator on the underbelly of the Picket Cowrie. The blowback surge from the fully charged generator destroyed Cowrie's power compartment and left the ship afire and dead in space. The instant Cowrie was neutralized, the vagabond began to move, turning away from Lady Luck and accelerating out past the disabled picket's position, well clear of the remaining interdictors. Just 42 seconds after it began, it was over, the vagabond vanishing into the center of a hyperspace cone. The final tally for the contact: 1 drone ferret destroyed, 1 interdiction picket disabled and abandoned, with 26 casualties, including 6 fatalities in the power compartment. 1 yacht recovered and returned to a mooring on Glorious's hull, undamaged except for the primary airlock. 1 successful boarding of the target, 1 successful escape by the target. 1 expedition armada scattered across space, with 4 ships in pursuit of the target, and the others pulling ambulance or cleanup duty. And, most troubling of all to Drayson, 1 contact suit gauntlet recovered in the debris, right hand, in Lando's size. The report contained some positive information as well. It was beyond dispute now that the vagabond's weapons were compound. The intersection of 2 or more beams did the damage, probably through some sort of harmonic resonance. Unless there were more weapon nodes concealed amidships, it seemed as though 6 targets were all the vagabond could handle. Possibly as few as 4 ships, properly spaced, might overwhelm its defenses. But first, Kube-McDowell would have to find the vagabond again, a task that had taken 2 years the last time. Drayson called up the chart of the pursuit and studied it closely. 3 ships were racing for search stations along the vagabond's last heading: Lightning, 10 light-years out, Glorious, 20, and Marauder, 30. The improvised plan called for them to drop sensor buoys with hypercom repeaters at those entry points, and then begin making short jumps out to the limits of sensor range, hoping to catch a glimpse of their quarry. The precision of the plan did not mask its weakness. Its slim chance of success depended on the vagabonds making a single short jump. If it followed a short jump with a second jump on another heading, where there were no eyes to see or sensors to track, or if it carried the first jump out 50, 100, 500 light-years beyond the borders of the New Republic and into the chaos of the core. Drayson knew that Colonel Kube-McDowell had addressed an urgent appeal for more ships to both New Republic intelligence and the Fleet Office before Glorious jumped out from Gamir Ascalon. He also knew the likely answer to that appeal.
The only real chance for us to catch her lies with you, Lando.
Drayson said softly.
You must help us find you.
But it was not Drayson's way to abandon someone he had sent into danger. His fingers danced over his controller, bringing an inventory of Alpha Blue's assets in Sector 151 to the screen. There might be little he could do, but he would do what he could, and there was always some way to alter the odds. The habits of the Senate's Council on Security and Intelligence were not unlike those of the institutions over which it reigned. It announced no meetings, released no public reports, and met only in closed session in the field-shielded room 030, deep in the sub-basements of the old Imperial Palace. So earnestly secretive were the 7 sitting members that in Coruscant's own dialect of Basic, the phrase CSI agenda had become a benchmark for the unattainable, the impossible item on a scavenger hunt. Discouraged suitors would despair that they had a better chance of taking a CSI agenda home. Subordinates handed a daunting task could comfort themselves with the thought, it could be worse. He could want a CSI agenda, too. Even Drayson found it difficult to discover when the CSI would take up Kube-McDowell's request. And when he finally did learn about that session, it was too late to find a way to listen in. Last item on the agenda is the Talzkan expedition, said General Carlist Raikin. May I assume that you all received your copies of the report? He waited a moment, then, hearing no dissent, went on. Discussion, please. Senator Kral Prajet of Adatha, chairman of the CSI, leaned back in his chair and combed his fingers back through his skull down. What is there to decide? The mission was a failure. Close the books. Lando Calrissian and his team are still aboard the Vagabond. Raiken reminded him gently. What reason do you have to think they're still alive? Praja asked. Why would any captain capable of acting as surely and decisively as the captain of the Vagabond did in escaping make the mistake of not repelling boarders with equal vigor? It is possible that they were taken prisoner, said Raiken. It is even possible that they escaped capture. Praja pulled his datapad toward him. How do you account for the contact suit Gauntlet found by the recovery teams? It's Calrissian's, I believe. I don't have an explanation, Raiken admitted. General Raiken, said Senator Kertok Noim. Do I understand correctly that the gauntlet is undamaged and there's no blood on it? That's correct. She nodded. In that case, this gauntlet does not seem to me to be reason enough to abandon these people to their fate. It's not clear to me what we can do for them, said Senator Amamanam, who represented the Badass on Coruscant. Unless Senator Noim would like to lead us in prayer to the Star Mother. The laughter around the table was cold, but Noim's eyes were colder. There are two lives at stake here. The lives of two valuable friends of the New Republic. And please, remember that the droids are of no small value either. They had their own role in making it possible for there to be a New Republic. I doubt there are any droids anywhere who are better known than these two, or better loved for that matter. If they are so important to the New Republic, they should be in the museum along with all the other beloved icons, said Praja curtly. Along with Luke Skywalker, to whom they belong? Asked Senator Lillard. I must agree with Kertok. I would not want to face the questions that would come if these four were to disappear in our service, and we were to make no effort to recover them. In our service? Have you read the account of how they came to be on that ship? They can hardly be said to be in our service, said Senator Amamanam. General, could you kindly explain to us how it is that the Baron Calrissian and the others came to be involved in the first place? I don't recall there being any mention of them in the expedition plan you brought to us. General Calrissian was representing the fleet on this mission, at the request of the fleet office, Raiken said deliberately. The others comprise his support staff, apparently assembled specifically for this mission. This is also absurd, Praja fumed. If it were Hamax and his men on board the Vagabond, as it should have been, we would not be having this discussion. Either they would have disabled the ship, or we'd be sending our regrets to the families of the missing in action. Senator? But Kube-McDowell allowed these meddlers, these outsiders, these amateurs to intervene, and suddenly it becomes impossible to write off our losses in a professional manner. Raiken tried again. Senator, have the reports from Colonel Kube-McDowell led you to reevaluate the potential gain if we succeed in recovering the Keller vessel? No, General, said Praja, with a touch of impatience at being handled. I'm still quite convinced that this artifact is worthy of our interest. But I don't see that the circumstances justify sending a Force 2 armada wandering through 1,000 cubic light-years on what is very likely to be a futile effort. With all the uncertainty in Farlax, we could surely find better uses for those ships than chasing a phantom, said Senator Amamanam. The Vagabond will turn up again. Will you be personally handling the apologies to Luke Skywalker, then? Senator Noim asked cuttingly. Will the chairman make himself available to the news grids to explain exactly under what circumstances these notables disappeared? If I might make a suggestion, Raiken began. By all means, said Praja. A contact suit isn't designed for long endurance. Its recycling systems are simple and relatively inefficient. Its consumables, if managed wisely, might last the wearer perhaps 200 hours, certainly no more than 220, said the intelligence director. So we simply wait a few days to declare them dead, is that your point? Not quite, Raiken said. If they are still alive, the general and his team will be highly motivated to act expeditiously. Anything they can do to impede the flight of the Kala vessel, they will do in the next several days. So it seems only prudent to me to allow Pakpakat to continue the search for, say, another 15 days. If nothing else, said Senator Amamanam, doing so would cut the heart out of the charge that we abandon the Baron to his fate. He glanced expectantly down the table toward Senator Noim. If you'd truly like to protect yourself, I suggest you go one step further and propose that we send Pakpakat the additional vessels he requested, said Noim. Otherwise, the search might be seen as the token gesture it is. No, said Prajet. Pakpakat gets no more ships. That incompetent Hortex spook, what he ought to get is a review board and a dishonorable separation. But I suppose I'll have to settle for the General's finding a deep dark hole to drop him in once this is over. I wouldn't support sending additional ships, said Raiken, ignoring Prajet's other comments. The way I see it, we now have assets aboard the target vessel. That changes the tactical equation. We are not going to be trying to run it into an interdiction net or firing on it. We just need to find it and be on hand to pick up our people. I see Pakpakat only has 4 vessels actively committed to the search at this point. That's right, said Raiken. So, I think we can reasonably talk about downsizing our commitment to this project. If everyone will look at page 15 in the mission outline, the ship assignment list.
Chapter 2.
Have you ever used a cutting blaster before, Lando? Lobot asked with concern.
Lots of times.
Said Lando, bracing himself between the inner bulkhead and the equipment sled.
But don't ask me for a list. The statute of limitations hasn't run out on all of them. R2, can I have a little more light in here, right in front of me?
The dome-topped droid drifted up and forward on tiny puffs of thruster gas, changing the angle of the light slightly.
That's good, R2. Hold right there.
Be careful not to cut too deeply, Lobot said. There may be mechanisms behind the wall.
If R2's right, there's nothing behind this part of the wall. The sonogram showed a thin bulkhead and another compartment beyond, 5 meters in diameter.
I know, but a ship this size could have waste ports 5 meters in diameter, or fuel conduits.
You know, Lobot, when you're cut off from your databases, you're almost as much of an old lady as 3PO here.
Lando said, but not without affection.
3PO, any change?
No, Master Lando. There has been no response to my first 961,008.
Save it for the log.
Lando said.
Lobot, 3PO, I know how much you want to watch over my shoulder while I do this. But if I were you, I'd move around to where my contact suit is between you and the blaster. That way, if I make a mistake, you might still be around to learn from it.
If R2 would give me a link to his video processor, Lobot said.
Do it, R2.
Lando held the cutting blaster up before his face with his right hand, and with his left set the selector for hairline and depth for shallow.
Maybe we'll finally get a response to this message,
he said, and activated the cutting. Under Lando's steady hand, the blue-white energy blade drew a straight line down the face of the bulkhead. But when Lando pulled the blaster away to inspect his work, he found that the blaster had left no mark. The bulkhead was intact.
Guess I was a little too careful,
Lando said, frowning.
Move the sled in just a little for me, Lobot.
When he had finished adjusting his position, Lando reached forward and drew the blaster blade slowly down the face of the bulkhead once more.
What the...
What is happening?
3PO asked worriedly. He rose from behind Lando to peer over his shoulder at the wall.
A lot of nothing,
said Lando in disgust.
I can't even scorch it.
I think you are mistaken, Lando, said Lobot. Please try again, and this time move the cutter more quickly. Lando slashed the cutter downward across the face of the bulkhead. The brilliant glare of the blade left a thin black line in its wake, a clean, straight cut that closed up and vanished a fraction of a second later.
Self-sealing bulkheads?
It would appear so, said Lobot.
Well, that's just dandy.
Lando said, shutting off the cutting blaster.
I can't cut us a door because it hasn't the manners to stay cut.
Lobot tapped Lando on the helmet, then gestured at the blaster. May I try something?
Be my guest.
Lando surrendered the blaster and moved aside, pulling himself hand over hand toward the aft end of the equipment sled. Lobot studied the selectors on the blaster for a few moments, then opted for the medium drill setting. The blade appeared this time as a pointed cone, which Lobot pressed against the wall until half its length had disappeared. When he withdrew it, there was a hole a few centimeters across in the bulkhead. The hole began to close at once, but it took noticeably longer to vanish than the cut had, long enough for Lobot to pull himself down to eye level and catch a quick glimpse through the breach.
Very clever, Lobot. Very interesting. Between 1 and 2 seconds, I think.
Lando said. I was hoping for this result, said Lobot, turning toward Lando. Whatever mechanisms are involved, substantially more material must be transported or replaced to fill a hole than to seal a cut.
Did you see anything?
Nothing useful. An open space of some kind, dimly lit. Everything had a yellowish cast.
Let's try a bigger hole.
Lando said.
R2, do you have some sort of remote sensor you can stick through this time?
The limpet, Lobot suggested. We could reach through and attach the limpet on the other side of the bulkhead. Both R2 and I are capable of receiving its sensor data.
I don't want to make quite that big a hole.
Lando said.
Not this time. Every time we cut into that bulkhead, we're reminding this ship we're here. I don't know how many times we can bite before we get swatted. R2, what about it?
R2 tootled pridefully as a small equipment panel on his body popped open and a slender wand, topped by a small silver ball, unfolded from within.
You needn't be snippy about it.
3PO chided. The response from R2 sounded like an electronic raspberry.
Well, I'm sure it's not his business to keep track of those details.
3PO said, bristling.
I've been in your company for longer than I care to remember, and I certainly don't keep track of every gadget in that ugly little chassis.
Lando whistled sharply.
Whoa, you too. Save it for later. 3PO, was there any part of that I need to know?
Master Lando, R2 says that astromech droids must frequently inspect systems which are located in confined spaces.
3PO said curtly.
He apparently believes that R2 units are important enough that this should be common knowledge. He has quite the little ego, you know.
Yes, well, I've often thought it's a shame he doesn't have your modesty, 3PO.
Lando said, flying himself back to the middle of the equipment sled and reclaiming the cutting blaster from Lobot.
Have you made any new pen pals since we started cutting?
There has been no response whatever from the masters of this vessel since I began trying to hail them,
said 3PO.
I suggest you proceed with whatever you are planning.
Lando changed the selector to medium drill and activated the blaster.
R2, come in close. I want that sensor one through the hole as quickly as possible. But don't let yourself get caught when it closes. And Lobot, R2, between the two of you, I want to know exactly how large a hole I make and exactly how long it takes it to close. Is everyone ready? Let's do it then.
The medium setting allowed Lando to open a hole that was nearly large enough to admit a man's clenched fist. Switching off the blaster, Lando pushed off from the wall and did a backward somersault, floating out of R2's way. The droid moved smoothly and surely into position, extending the wand through the very center of the opening and snatching it back at the last moment as the hole disappeared again.
Show us, R2. Holoprojector,
Lando ordered. The droid chirped in acknowledgement and offered up a fisheye perspective of a round-walled passage that seemed to bend around or through the ship in both directions. There was no sign of life or machinery, nor any response to the cutting of the hole and the invasion of R2's scan probe.
Looks promising,
said Lando.
Whatever it could give us access to at least part of the ship. R2, Lobot, what's the verdict? How big a hole do I need to cut to get us all through?
I am afraid there is a problem, Lando, Lobot said. R2's measurements show that the larger hole closed faster per unit of area than the smaller one.
It looked that way to me, too.
Lando agreed.
Bigger holes probably get higher priority from the ship's systems. What don't you think we can get through?
The short dimension of the common wall between that passage and this chamber is approximately 1.7 meters, Lobot said, pointing. My estimate is that a hole that size will take only 6 or 7 seconds to close down to the point where it will be impassable for any of us. That is not enough time to move the sled and the 4 of us into the other chamber.
It might be enough time. Jump troops go out the drop chute of an assault boat at a rate of 1 per second.
Jump troops have the benefit of training and gravity. I have modeled it with R2's nav processor. At best, one of us would not make it through.
Well, that is a problem,
said Lando.
because I have a sneaking suspicion that when we cut a hole that size, this ship's gonna get fed up with us and try to spit us out again. I don't think we'll get a chance to do it twice.
He thought hard for a moment, then waved the blaster in the air.
Everything off the sled. I need to make some modifications.
The equipment sled was an uncomplicated device. Its thick, rectangular frame contained the gyros, fuel cells, and thrust stabilizer system, and also provided cut-out handholds at regular intervals. The standard diamond-patterned metal grid that filled the frame provided a wealth of lockdowns for gear kits and tools. Both sides of the grid on the team's sled were heavily loaded. Modifications?
Yeah,
Said Lando.
I think we need a frame for our door.
Clinging to the sled with one hand and wielding the cutting blaster with the other, Lando slashed away where the grid joined the sled frame. When he was finished, the sled was in two pieces. Lando pushed the wobbly, heavily loaded grid toward R2.
You tow that through to the other side.
The droid's grappling clamps appeared and latched onto the grid securely.
Give me a hand here, Lobot.
Lobot eased forward and grabbed a handhold at the opposite end of the gutted sled frame. I am remembering something I accessed earlier, he said. The chief designer of the Ma'aud funerary temples directed his draftsman that all obvious passages should be booby-trapped, and all traps should be made as inviting as possible.
Thank you for that uplifting thought,
said Lando.
If we get out of this, you should think about a new career as a morale officer. Everyone ready?
Master Lando, what should I do?
Lando checked his combat blaster in its holster, then slid the selector on the cutting blaster to wide.
Add this to our apology,
he said, and pointed it at the bulkhead.
Hang on!
The brilliant flare of the cutting beam momentarily dazzled the view screen of Lando's contact suit, and the vaporized material from 2.5 square meters of bulkhead filled the air as a gray cloud. Before Lando could even see clearly, the hole began to close.
Let's go! Let's go! Get it lined up!
Lando shouted. The two men maneuvered the frame into position, and the bulkhead closed around it as though it were a tailored fit. But as they did, they heard a deep, rumbling groan from the ship, a sound that had no direction. Though the surroundings were alien, the sound was familiar. The signature of a form of stress that aged large vessels' hulls and led to the spectacular form of self-destruction known as an exit breach. It was the exit growl, the characteristic sound caused by portions of the ship emerging from hyperspace nanoseconds before the rest as the jump field collapsed.
I hate it when I'm right,
Lando said, gesturing with his free hand.
Move it, R2! Now!
The little droid jetted quickly toward the opening, towing the heavily loaded grid behind it. For a moment, Lando thought the frame looked too small for R2 to pass through it. But the droid retracted his treads as far as they would go, turned his body, and cleared the opening by bare centimeters. The equipment grid smoothly passed through behind him.
Wait for me, R2.
3PO called, flailing his arms and legs in midair.
Go ahead.
Lando said to Lobot, passing him the cutting blaster and waving him on.
I'll get 3PO.
Lobot didn't wait to be told twice, swinging himself feet first through the improvised doorway as neatly as a gymnast taking a turn on the parallel bar. Meanwhile, Lando clipped the safety line from the contact suit's belt to the handhold of the frame and launched himself toward the droid, his gloved hand extended to him.
Oh, thank you, Master Lando.
The droid said relievedly as he grabbed hold of Lando's arm. Then 3PO saw Lando's eyes suddenly widen in alarm.
What is it, sir?
Watching from the inner passage, Lobot saw the same thing Lando had seen when he looked past 3PO toward the outer bulkhead. A small opening appearing and quickly irising into an airlock that revealed a stark, starry blackness beyond. Moments later, the external mics on the suits picked up the hiss of outrushing air. Lando did not take the time to answer 3PO's concerned inquiry.
Heads up! Incoming!
He bellowed and swung 3PO by the arms toward the inner doorway. Bracing himself against the frame, Lobot reached through, caught 3PO's right foot, and dragged him into the inner passage. But the rush of air through the inner passage and out through the wound kept building, and it was all Lobot could do to keep himself from being sucked through. Nor was he the only one in trouble. R2's thrusters could not hold against the screaming wind, and he squawked loudly as he was dragged inexorably back down the inner passage toward the opening, clinging determinedly to the equipment grid. Meanwhile, Lando dangled helplessly at the end of his safety line, his feet banging against the edge of the outer airlock as the air grabbed at him on its way into the vacuum beyond. Only 3PO was relatively secure, his metal body braced against one end of the sled frame, blocking part of the opening. But he was waving his arms wildly like a shell-spined mud crawler that had been flipped on its back.
Oh, R2, we're doomed,
he cried.
I never did like space travel. Look where your adventuring has led us.
You have to cut the frame!
Lando was shouting into the comlink.
Cut the frame and it'll pull out. The rest of the hole will close. Do it!
Not with you on that side, Lobot said, climbing across 3PO to where the safety line was attached. There's a take-up crank on that belt line. See if you can pull yourself up that way.
No good,
said Lando.
Too much load. Just cut the frame, will ya?
Lobot glanced sideways down the corridor to see if he and 3PO were in danger of being knocked through the hole by an out-of-control R2 and his cargo. But to Lobot's relief, he saw that R2 had made his way to the edge of the passage, burned a small hole with his arc welder, and let the hole close around a repair arm. So far, the anchor was holding against the current, which seemed to Lobot to be weakening. Forget it, Lobot directed, reaching down between his braced legs and catching hold of the thin safety line. He began hauling on the line, hand over hand, reeling Lando in like a great white fish. The cyborg's wiry body concealed surprising strength, and soon he had hold of the tow ring on Lando's suit at the back of the neck. Use your thrusters now, full vertical.
Full vertical,
Lando echoed. With one smooth, powerful motion, Lobot pulled Lando up between his widely spaced knees, lying straight back to drag Lando's legs clear and hurl him free down the passage. Quickly sitting back up, Lobot pulled out the cutting blaster and slashed the frame in 2 places. There was a shower of sparks each time, then a puff of D-20 propellant from the broken lines as he kicked out the section between the cuts. It spun free and tumbled out through the airlock on the breeze. The bulkhead groaned under Lobot, and the rest of the frame began to collapse, twisting sideways as it did, until it too was carried away. Seconds later, the hole had closed under them, the pitch of the roaring air rising to a shrill note before it cut off entirely, leaving them in silence.
I guess we only get to use that doorway trick once,
said Lando. The inside of his faceplate was fogged with sweat.
Where'd you learn that?
I learned it wild water rafting on Oko-E, Lobot said. It is the preferred method for getting a raft mate out of the river before the sulfur ice pulls him under. That was my last vacation, he added.
You have unexpected depth, Lobot,
said Lando.
Is everyone all right?
I am certain that several of my circuits are overheated.
3PO pronounced.
With your permission, Master Lando, I would like to perform a self-diagnostic.
Go ahead,
said Lando.
While you're doing that, we'll get R2 free, and then we can start figuring out what to do next.
That should not prove too taxing, said Lobot. The choices appear to be to go that way. He crossed his arms over his chest, pointing a finger in each direction, or that way.
Shh!
Lando said, craning his head.
Wait, listen.
They listened in silence, with sinking hearts. In the mysterious hollow spaces of the Vagabond, the fading rumble of the entry ground echoed for a long time.
Blast!
Lando sighed.
She's jumped again.
Something interesting here, said Josala Kren. Craddock Stopa bent forward over the surface scanner. The false color image mapped the undulations of a great glacier as it crawled its way along a widening, steep-sided valley toward a frozen sea. Where? Here, said Josala, pointing out a string of small blue blotches scattered along the northeast edge of the glacier. The side-scanning radar pulled these up. They're sitting anywhere from 11 to 19 meters down in the ice. Rock from the lateral moraine? No, for two reasons. First, they're awfully regular in size, oblong, between 1.5 and 2 meters in the long axis. And second, do you know anything about the flow lines in the accumulation zone of a glacier? Not a thing. Something that falls on the surface of a glacier moves down valley with the ice and down into the body of the glacier as more snow falls on top of it, Josala said. The lateral moraine running through that part of the glacier is made up of rock coming off this cliff face. She pointed at a side valley well back along the path of the glacier. So, by the time that rock gets to here, it's 50 meters down. These other objects, they haven't been in the ice as long as that rock underneath them, and they would have had to come onto the ice somewhere in here. Josala traced a circle with her finger over a flat area up valley. That's out in the middle of nothing, said Stopa. Right, she wrinkled her face in thought. It's hard to be sure of the timetables with cataclysmic climatic change, but I'd guess that whatever these are, they've only been in the ice for 50 to 100 years. His eyes widened. Bodies. Burials on the ice. That was my thought. It makes sense. Nomadic groups, or perhaps caves somewhere nearby. Ice caves, possibly. It doesn't matter where they lived, so long as we've found where they died. How deep is the shallowest of those bodies? 11 meters? When Josala nodded, Stopa turned to the pilot. We're going to want our rover. Craddock? I know, but hear me out. We'll wait until the weather's good there, Stopa said, his eyes animated by anticipation. We'll set the rover down right on top of the site. We leave the engine running at idle, so there's no chance for anything to freeze up. We work right out of the gear bay, because all we have to do is take a core. Our equipment ought to be able to handle that. You want to drill a core? Josala said in horror. That'll mangle the remains. Yes, Stopa said. I know it violates the usual protocols, but we weren't sent here to recover bodies. We were sent here to recover biological material. When our reinforcements arrive, they can go down and excavate the other sites. But in the meantime, we'll have something we can analyze and report back on. Josala shook her head. I'd really rather wait for the people who know what they're doing. But we know how to take a core, Stopa said. Kren, a first-year apprentice, knows how to take a core. We'll be out of there in 30 minutes, 20. Josala's reluctance still showed on her face. Craddock drew closer and dropped his voice. The bonus from the NRI would be enough to fund the expedition to Stobox, he said. But if we wait until Panga Rift arrives, we'll have to share the bonus. We might even end up being cut out completely. He waited to see if that would sway her, then added, I give you my word that we'll withdraw at the first sign of any trouble. No, better. I'm making you expedition boss. You say that's it, and that's it. Josala looked up at him with a frown, then passed him to the pilot. What Dr. Stopa said. We're going to want our rover. The archaeologist's little Mark II World rover skimmed across the top of snow-covered Southwest Range and began its descent into the glacier valley. You're on the beam. 850 meters out, said the voice of IX-26's pilot, continuing to talk Stopa and Kren down to their destination. The navigation and sensor arrays of the rover were no match for those of the ferry. Copy, said Stopa, who was at the controls. I'm going from glide to hover mode now. 700, 600, 550. Several small shield doors on the rover's fuselage and delta wings slid open, revealing vector nozzles for the thrust jets. With the rover's nose stall high and the nozzles perpendicular to the wings, the little ship quickly lost its forward velocity and began to settle. Josala was peering out the starboard cockpit view pane, studying the ground below them. The steep inner slope of the Southwest Range wore a smooth blanket of snow, but the surface of the glacier itself was a field of jagged ice blocks, some as large as the rover itself. It looked a lot smoother on the SSR display, Josala said. The rover can cope with a 40-degree terrain tilt. We'll be all right. It's going to be like drilling through rock. But ice won't wear the bits like rock does, said Stopa. We'll get through. 220, the pilot was saying into Stopa's headset. Ease her ahead to port. Copy, Stopa said. Kren, we have to at least give it a try. Just then, a cloud of swirling white particles billowed up around the rover from below, closing in around the cockpit view panes and cutting visibility nearly to zero. It's out dawn blast, Stopa said quickly. He raised the control handle and the rover climbed nimbly out of the cloud, which immediately began to dissipate beneath them. Not a problem. 150. You can't land us in a whiteout, said Josala. If you set us down on the edge of one of those ice boulders, we'll flip over before the strut levelers can do anything. 95. I'll just hover at 10 meters, until the thrusters blow the site clear of loose material, Stopa said confidently. If I can't get definition on the undercarriage hollow, I won't try to land, all right? All right, Josala said with a sigh. 60, the pilot said. Ease off or you're going to overrun the site. Stopa tapped the air brake lightly and pulled back on the control handle slightly. As the rover settled toward the glacier, it was once again engulfed in a billow of jet-driven snow. But before long, the swirling cloud began to thin and the horizon returned. 25! Josala peered forward. I can't judge distances without a referent. That big slab of ice, he patted her arm. It's bigger and farther away than you think. 10, 8, 5... Easy! Take me to plus 16. I want to put the rover's tail right down on top of it. It's under you now. Plus 6, plus 9, plus 14. Stopa pushed the control handle sharply down, and the rover dropped hard and shook from the impact. Nose tilted down and sliding sideways. It came to a stop with another small jolt, then slowly came to level. There, he said, switching quickly among the undercarriage scanners and studying the display. Those closest to the thrusters were frozen over with steam ice, but the forward and aft scanners were clear. The front landing strut seemed to be wedged in a small crevasse, though no damage was evident. Aft, the body of the rover was sitting comfortably above the ice. It wasn't half bad, he said with a grin, setting the systems to standby. Let's just get it done, Josala said crossly. One behind the other, they made their way through the crawl space over the orbital engine compartment to to the crowded gear bay. There they helped each other into their improvised snow gear. The ferret's sole emergency spacesuit for her, a standard digger's isolation suit for him, augmented by the ferret pilot's spacesuit glove liners. Neither of them was prepared for the blinding dazzle of the glacier when the gear bay doors swung open. The sky was clear, and the blue-white sun lit the landscape with cold crystal fire as hard to look at as the sun itself. Josala's viewplate adjusted for it, but Stopa had to avert his eyes and squint to keep from being overwhelmed. "Spectacular," Stopa exulted. "Sightsee when we're finished," Josala chided. Everything took longer than it should have. The core drill base didn't want to latch in the working position, giving Josala reason to worry about whether the bay doors would seal properly when it was time to leave. The gloves made them both clumsy and turned the routine assembly of the first sections of the coring tube into a test. Josala's sounding for the body beneath them was marred by crazy echoes. The drill's gimbal mount froze up until the drill was turned on, complicating the alignment on Josala's sounding. But at last the coring bit chewed its way into the surface of the glacier and headed down into its depths. 7 sections, Stopa shouted over the rumble of the drill. "At this angle we'll need 7 sections. Josala waved her hand in acknowledgement and turned away to pull the next section from the rack. It danced under her touch, and she drew her hand back. She pressed her gauntlet against the wall of the bay and felt it shivering. It was then that she realized that what she had thought was her own body shivering was the deck of the rover vibrating under her feet. The drill was roaring now, as though its bearing rings had disintegrated, its lubricants turned to grit. "Turn it off!" she cried, pulling her way along to where Stopa was leaning out the back of the bay, looking down at the core drive and measuring the drill's progress. "Turn it off!" He looked up at her dumbly, and she reached behind him for the controls. The core cylinder spun to a stop, but neither the vibration nor the noise ceased. Just the opposite, in fact. The rumble was growing louder, and the shaking growing worse. With a desperate fear already in their eyes, they looked out from the gear bay at the mountain ridge behind them, the ridge they had flown over just minutes before. The ridge that had been like cotton bathed in sunlight. The middle of the ridge was now hidden behind an onrushing wall of snow and ice, spreading and climbing the sky as it hurtled closer. There was no chance to escape into that sky. The avalanche was on them before they could even quite remember the word. It tumbled the rover before it like a toy, packing its every crevice with snow, engulfing the ship in the furious turbulence of the icy maelstrom. When the flow finally slowed and ceased, its leading edge reaching nearly halfway across the valley, there were 2 more bodies buried on the ice for Penga Rift to recover.
The first thing we need is a way to find this spot again. And this passage is notably lacking in landmarks,
said Lando. Using the cutting blaster, he sliced a small triangle off one corner of the equipment grid.
Where was our doorway? Here?
Lower, said Lobot. There.
I'm glad you're sure,
said Lando.
I'm all turned around.
He cut a slit in the bulkhead, inserted one edge of the triangle, and held it there until the bulkhead closed around it. Then he placed one palm flat against the bulkhead and tried to tug the metal grid out of the wall.
That should do it.
Lobot drifted up with a short length of cord in one hand. We might want more than one marker before we're done, he said, looping the cord through one of the diamond-shaped openings and tying the ends together with an overhand knot. 1 knot equals the first marker. We'll put 2 knots on the next one.
Okay,
said Lando, turning away from the wall.
There's one thing I overlooked when we took inventory. I burned about 60% of my thruster propellant trying to get up here.
I have 91% remaining, said Lobot. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to share my supply with you,
You might end up sharing it by carrying me around on your back.
Lando said.
3PO, how are you doing for thrust mass?
R2 burbled, and 3PO offered the translation.
R2 says that his propellant supply is adequate, but he would like to be informed when any of us locates a power coupling.
With any luck, it'll be right next to an oxygen valve.
Lando said grimly.
All right, we are in a survival situation. This ship has now jumped twice, and we have to assume that it lost any pursuit that was mounted with that second jump. That means our first priority is to locate and disable the hyperdrive and stop this ship.
But Master Lando, if we disable the hyperdrive, we would be stranded.
3PO protested.
We don't know how long. The Vagabond stays in hyperspace. Weeks, months, years. The galaxy is 120,000 light years across. I like our chances better stranded.
Master Lando, would it not be more prudent to find the masters of this vessel and petition them to take us back to Coruscant?
3PO, I think we are the masters of this vessel now.
Lando said.
We must be if we're going to survive.
He ticked off the priorities on his fingers.
First, we find some way to stop this ship. Second, we find out where that leaves us. Third, we find out who our nearest friend is. Fourth, we find some way to signal them. If we get that all done before Lobot and I run out of air and the droids run out of power, then we can worry about who built the Vagabond and why.
We may need to engage those questions in order to achieve those objectives, said Lobot.
Maybe,
said Lando.
but in my experience, you really don't need to know much about a precision machine in order to smash it.
He pointed a finger to the left, then to the right.
What's your best guess? Hyperdrive aft or forward?
Center of mass is the most efficient placement, Lobot said. Forward. Lando nodded.
Then let's get going.
Colonel Pakpakat hovered near the communications station as the cruiser Glorious dropped out of hyperspace. The chase armada was strung out along 40 light years, and Glorious was the second bead on the string.
Give them to me as fast as they come,
He said to the tech at the station. Yes, sir. I'm seeing 6 dispatches. An emergency action directive from the fleet office, copied to Captain Garch. A blue letter from the NRI, copied to Captain Hamax. A dispatch marked urgent from the Obroan Institute. Reports from Lightning, Prawn, and Nagua,
the 3 ships behind us.
said Pakpakat.
Very well. Make dispatches available at my station.
Crossing the bridge with long, light-footed strides, Pakpakat eased himself into his flak couch and brought up the secure display. Neither his face nor his carriage betrayed any emotion as he read through the dispatches one after another. When he was finished, he tipped the screen away and let out a long hiss.
Major Lego Baru.
Isidro Legorbaru, the Mahaili intelligence officer who was serving as Pakpakat's tactical aide, hurried to his station in response to the summons. Colonel,
We have just received a fleet-wide Level 1 alert.
Pakpakat said, tipping his display upward so that the Major could read the emergency action directive.
My request for additional ships for the search has been denied.
I am under orders to release Marauder, Prawn, and Nagua from their duties here, so that they may return to their respective commands at this possible speed.
That's nearly half our remaining strength, sir, Legorbaru said, shaking his head. What do they expect us to do?
Fail, apparently.
Pakpakat said curtly.
I have also been placed on notice that Glorious may be recalled as well. We are to remain on 1-hour alert status, which means no jumps greater than 1/2 light year.
At least that allows us to proceed with the search, said Legorbaru. But we should call Ketamore forward to fill the gap in the line when Marauder pulls out. She should be finished with recovery work by now anyway.
Edamore has already jumped to meet you with the dead and injured from the cavalry,
said Pakpakat.
We will not have her back for another day at least, if they allow her to rejoin us at all.
Lagorbaru peered intently at the display. I don't get it, Colonel. Why the sudden change of priorities? What's happening back there? It must be something big if they can't spare a 30-year-old gunship and a couple of interdiction pickets.
That information was not made available to me,
said Pakpakat, his mouth curled in an unhappy threat snarl. Maybe I can get something out of Channel, said Lagorbaru. Would you like me to try? Pakpakat nodded.
Please do,
he said.
I would like to have a better idea of just who I must wrestle to keep this mission alive.
Chapter 3.
The procession through the passageway of the Teljkan Vagabond was led by Lando Calrissian, combat blaster in hand. Following close behind was R2, towing the equipment grid protectively behind him. Last in line was Lobot, with 3PO riding on the back of his contact suit like a child perched on the back of his father.
This is my fault.
Lando said, peering over his shoulder at them.
I should have gone ahead and gotten a thrust belt for 3PO. Maybe even a complete thrust harness and power pack. Consumable refills for the contact suits, too.
We have them, had them, on Lady Luck, said Lobot. Everything could not fit on one sled.
I'd trade most everything on that grid for a couple of refill packs. I never thought we'd be in 0G, as long as it looks like we will be.
Forever, maybe, Lando thought grimly. It is an interesting design choice, Lobot said. The Kella appear to have done everything they could to make it hard for us to move about in here. There is no artificial gravity, no spin. The bulkheads are non-magnetic and have no friction tracks, handholds, or zip lines.
What's so interesting about that?
The Kella were planet dwellers, Lobot said, surprised by the question. How did they expect to get around in this ship? Lando grunted.
Maybe the Kella are giant slugs as wide as this tunnel.
Perhaps, said Lobot, but even giant slugs are probably more comfortable in a gravity field. I can't help thinking that somewhere in this vessel there must be a switch that would make all of this much easier. The passage seemed to have no end. It curved away in front of Lando like an ever-receding horizon, teasing him with a promise it never fulfilled.
How long has it been now?
R2's event recorders say we entered the Vagabond 3 hours, 8 minutes ago. We left our entry point 47 minutes ago, Lobot answered.
Seems even longer than that,
said Lando.
Am I the only one who's noticed? Shouldn't we have run out of ship by now?
Obviously we haven't.
Nothing is obvious here,
Lando said.
We're cruising at a meter per second minus overhead for a couple of stops. 45 minutes is 2,700 seconds, and this ship is only 1,500 meters long. We should be a kilometer out in front of the bow by now.
The conduits we saw on the surface of the Vagabond wind around it in complex patterns, Lobot said. If we are inside one of those, as I believe we are, that could account for the length of this passage.
No, it could not, because we're still heading forward, aren't we? If this passage had turned back, we would have noticed.
Would we? Asked Lobot. Without landmarks and reference, I find it difficult to be sure.
You're right about that. No matter how hard I try, I can't keep a picture of this place in my head.
Lando complained, turning to face the others.
R2, let me see your map again.
R2's holoprojector flickered into life. The map superimposed the data from R2's inertial movement sensors over the scans of the Vagabond performed by Pakpakat's technicians, showing their path through it as a bright red line. The line wiggled back and forth like a low-frequency sine wave across the hull of the ship and extended out beyond it.
See?
Lando said.
We are out in front of the ship.
R2, are your gyros operating normally? Lobot asked. The droid's affirmation was indignant. Then how do you explain this data? R2 chirped a curt reply.
The ship is longer now.
3PO translated incredulously.
What an absurdity. Even you can't be that foolish. You are obviously malfunctioning.
Lando sighed and surveyed the passage's face. They had dropped the words wall and bulkhead as inappropriate some time earlier.
It makes as much sense as anything else.
He said tiredly.
So we've seen something of the tricks their technology can do. Maybe nothing about this ship is immutable, not even its dimensions. Maybe the Keller don't play fair.
You have beaten rigged games in the past, Lobot said. Yeah, I guess I have, said Lando. But it helps a lot if you can watch the table for a while first. Kill the map, R2, but keep tracking us as best you can. We're going to pick up the pace a little. 2 meters per second. On my mark. Most of another hour dragged by before R2 made a discovery that set him to beeping agitatedly.
What is it?
Lando demanded.
R2 says that there is an irregularity ahead.
3PO said.
It may be an artifact of some kind.
Lando jetted ahead, scanning the passage face hopefully.
Which side?
Ahead and high to your left, Master Lando.
Said 3PO.
I see it!
Said Lando.
Blast! It's tiny! Wait! Oh no!
What is it? Lando? Lando did not explain, but when the others joined him, they got all the explanation they needed. A fragment of metal diamond grid protruded from the face of the passage, and a short cord waved from its anchoring knot. 3PO gave voice to the unspoken.
Why? We are back where we started.
That's impossible, Lobot said with a touch of irritation.
Yeah, you'd think so, but how else do you explain this?
Lando said, gesturing. Perhaps it was moved, said Lobot.
How? You think there's someone else on this ship?
I do not know, said Lobot. This could be a copy of our marker, a deception. Our 2 sensors still indicate that we're heading toward the bow.
Oh, we are, for the second time, most likely. What kind of crazy ship are we on? This passage doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't do anything.
It occupied us for 2 hours, Lobot pointed out.
So it did, and we've wasted those 2 hours and...
Lando checked his readouts.
About 9% of my thrust mass. Same for both of you, I'd guess.
This is most distressing. What do we do now?
3PO asked.
Well, we start playing smarter,
said Lando.
How much carbon line do we have?
Lobot knew the answer without looking. 2 spools, 5,000 meters each. Why?
If we keep going around in circles, we could find ourselves unable to get anywhere for lack of propellant. There's not enough grid to spare to make handholds the length of the passage, but there might be enough for line anchors. I think we better start stringing some hand lines now.
Lando said.
And they'll help keep us from getting fooled again.
Yes, we can build a topological map rather than a representational one, Lobot said. We will at least know the relationships between the places we have been, even if the exact geometry escapes us. Lando nodded.
Something had better start happening. I'm starting to get seriously annoyed.
Sometime later, and according to the counter on the line spool,
they had gone 884 meters down the passage, staking 4 improvised line anchors along the way when they came to the junction.
This is nuts,
Lando said, hovering in midair before the twin openings.
This passage didn't branch the last time we were through here.
If we've been through here before.
Don't start with me,
Lando said, turning. It was not a jest, Lobot said. It remains a possibility that these passages are channels or conduits, related in some way to the operation of the ship. What we have seen in here may have nothing to do with us.
Conduits for what? They're dry as a bone.
There are other types of fluids and flows. Gases, energy plasmas, electrical charges, Lobot said, and conduits generally require stops, valves, and switches of some sort. This is likely to be one, directly ahead of us. There may be another somewhere behind us that placed us on this path. Lando slowly spun back to face the junction.
If I had a fat toe, a short toe, a black toe, a new toe, I would know where to go.
He chanted softly. What?
Pardon me, sir. It is a children's counting rhyme from Bassares.
3PO said.
Master Lando, may I make a suggestion?
Any time, 3PO. The last thing I want is for the last thing I hear to be someone saying, "You know, I wondered about that earlier. I guess I should have spoken up."
Very well. Master Lando, my suggestion is that we should separate into two parties and explore both passages at the same time. This would be the most efficient method. If each party consists of a human and a droid, I believe we should be able to maintain communications, even if we become separated by some distance.
Not bad, 3PO,
said Lando.
We have two spools. We could set lines in both passages. Lobot?
I strongly advise against separating, Lobot said. Valves and stops which open seemingly at random can as easily close. It is also possible that we have been presented with this choice precisely for this purpose, to divide us. Lando frowned.
If we don't separate, which passage do we take?
Lobot shook his head. It will not matter, Lando. Just choose.
Very quickly they discovered that
it did not matter. The passage Lando chose ended 300 meters later, after turning downward, inward, nearly 90 degrees. When they doubled back, the alternate passage led them to another junction that was the reverse of the first, and to another short passage that turned sharply before ending abruptly.
There is something down there,
Lando said, lingering as the others turned back.
Both dead ends go to the same place. The hyperdrive could be down there.
Lobot could tell that the Baron was powerfully tempted to test his theory by blasting a hole in the wall, and touched his shoulder with an outstretched hand. Come, the cyborg said.
I'm tired of this.
I know, said Lobot. But you know that disabling a hyperdrive and destabilizing one are two very different matters. We will find a better way. Lando glanced at his telltales.
All right,
he said.
But if we haven't found it, by the time these numbers reach single digits, I'm coming back here. I'm not just gonna wait for death, Lobot.
I would not expect that of you, Lobot said. But for now, please, my friend. They jetted back up the passage together, side by side. With an artfulness born of desperation, Lando and Lobot managed to improvise 41 line anchors from the equipment grid and the supplies attached to it. Spaced 200 meters apart, those anchors secured more than 8 kilometers of hand lines, covering 3 major passages and more than 15 branches. In the course of their explorations, the team cataloged 11 stop valves, 18 switch valves, and 3 different routes back to their original marker. The purpose of the mechanisms and the pattern of their movements remained impenetrable, but R2-D2's holographic map steadily took on more useful form, framing the unknown with the known. Through it all, the vagabond bored on through hyperspace, seemingly oblivious to the passengers within. The early fears faded. The vessel remained mysterious, giving up few of its secrets, but it was no longer menacing in its own right. The threat to their lives was as impersonal as the graph of an equation, one in which none of the variables was under their control. At a point when yet another unexplored passage had disappointed them by leading them to a passage already hung with handlines, by unspoken mutual consent they lingered there, to rest and to recover their resolve. Lando looped the slack of a hand line around one wrist and let it hold him in place.
How long is this jump now?
A little over 37 hours, Lobot said.
Going a long way to somewhere,
Lando sighed.
Let's see, 4 times 3.14 times 39 cubed divided by 3. By now, we could be anywhere in 250,000 cubic light years of space. They'll need a telepath to find us.
You and I should sleep, said Lobot.
Why?
Sleeping will conserve our consumables, and human beings do not perform at peak efficiency when fatigued.
We don't get very much done when we're dead either.
Lando said.
The 5 hours we spend napping might be 5 hours we need to get out of this fix.
And the 5 hours we do not spend napping may result in one of us making a non-recoverable error.
We have the droids to keep us from making mistakes. They don't get tired.
Lando said.
Besides, I'm hungry. I'm kind of counting on turning up at an after-hours cafe somewhere around here.
Lando, that is not a rational expectation. Lando chuckled tiredly.
I know when I'm being silly,
he said.
Do you know when you're being stuffy?
Master Lando,
What is it, 3PO?
is it possible that this vessel could already have exited hyperspace without our knowing? Perhaps we were distracted by our other activities. We may not have gone as far as you fear.
No!
Lando said curtly.
I've never heard a ship growl like this one does, going in and coming out. We couldn't have missed it. I couldn't have, anyway. That's something I've been thinking about. Thinking about how long this ship's been jumping its shadows, hopping in and out of hyperspace. About how long it's been since it was in for a structural inspection and an overhaul. I had a friend in the yard at Azeri who showed me scanning hollows of the ships that had come through there, micro-fractures in the hyperdrive cage, the inner stringers, even the keel of a dreadnought. No, even if we had all the oxygen, all the water, all the hot cafe food we could eat, all the time we could ask for, I don't think I'd want to hang around here long enough to hear that growl too many more times. Because someday soon, no matter how well the killer tightened the nuts, this old crate is gonna turn herself into a deep space junkyard.
R2 cooed worriedly.
I wonder where Glorious is now.
Said 3PO.
That I won't think about.
Said Lando, and laughed.
I don't want to get depressed.
He released the hand line and floated free.
You rest if you want. Show me the map, R2. There's still a lot of ship to explore.
They found the coupling panel in the 71st hour of their imprisonment. It was pure luck that they did, since it appeared in a section they had already passed through twice and would not have returned to if a new passage they were marking had not brought them there. Nearly 2 meters long and more than a meter wide, the round-cornered panel was inset flush in the ceiling of the passage. Lando had established by fiat that the hand lines defined the right face of the passage, and all other directions derived from it. The panel was liberally decorated with sockets and projections of various heights, depths, and diameters, with the sockets clustered symmetrically in the center third and the projections flanking it.
Master Lando, what do you think it is?
Some sort of intelligence test, maybe.
Lando said, trying to peer through one of the larger diameter sockets.
Anyone feel up to taking it?
Why, it does. There's some resemblance to the busy box that Ambassador Nougat gave to Anakin Solo.
3PO said.
My, how he enjoyed spinning the wheels and pushing blocks through the holes.
Shut up, 3PO.
Yes, sir.
Lobot was carrying out his own examination of the artifact. 24 sockets in 2 sizes, 18 projections. I can see no obvious moving parts. The metal has a high sheen and reflectivity, and no protective finish, yet there are no scratches or scars, even in and around the sockets.
It looks like some sort of bus port to me.
Lando said.
Like the diagrac on the Falcon, or the maintenance cabinet on Lady Luck. Plug in here and you have access to the ship's systems.
That is what you have been looking for, said Lobot. How likely is it that you would find it?
It's the only mechanism we've seen in 9 clicks of passageway.
It is the only mechanism we have been able to recognize, said Lobot. But the design of this vessel apparently provides for mechanisms to be concealed until they are needed. I ask you to consider why this mechanism has appeared now.
You tell me.
Most likely because the ship will shortly need whatever function this mechanism serves.
Which gives us a chance to slip in and take care of ourselves,
Lando said.
These couplings weren't designed for us, but maybe we can make use of them anyway. Energy is energy. R2 can cope with thermal, plasma, or electrical ports. And data is data. If R2 can read it, 3PO can interpret.
Lando, you have no basis for concluding that this is a system port, Lobot pressed. It is more likely that the function of this mechanism is related to the function of these passages.
Which is what?
Lando snapped.
Holding cell, ventilator, rodent maze, a fungi farm. Are you saying we're not supposed to touch this either? Blast it all? How long are we supposed to wait before we do something?
You have not had more than 2 hours sleep in nearly 3 days, Lobot said. Your sense of urgency has been heightened.
That's right,
Lando said.
I haven't had anything to eat in so long, I'd cut a friend dead for a fracking cracker. My water supply tastes like it's gone around half a dozen times already. Are you more machine than man? Doesn't any of this affect you?
I am as human as you are, Lobot said. I doubt that you could be any hungrier than I am. My water supply is as disagreeable to me as yours is to you. But I do not understand the discoveries we have made.
Then don't you want to learn more? I want the droids to try to interface with this port. That's all! No blasters. No creative structural renovations.
Please listen, Lobot said earnestly. I do not understand why structures as extensive as these have been inert throughout our tenure on this ship, or why we have been permitted to move about in them unimpeded. These questions trouble me, and I am concerned that the appearance of this artifact may signal the end of either or both of those conditions.
All the more reason for us to make the first move,
Lando said.
R2, 3PO, come on up here. I want you to try to interface with the vagabond.
Lobot turned toward the droids. 3PO, R2, I ask you to wait until we know more. None of our supplies are critical yet. We do not know what we are dealing with.
I am sorry, sir, but Master Luke placed us in the care of Master Lando.
3PO said, allowing R2 to tow him toward the panel.
We are obliged to follow his instructions, no matter what reservations you may have.
Thank you, 3PO.
Lando said, fixing Lobot with a baleful gaze, touched with a hint of smug triumph.
I'm glad to know that you are still on the team.
Whether it was due more to Lobot's misgivings or to R2's innate sense of self-preservation, the astromech droid proceeded cautiously in carrying out Lando's instructions, and Lobot was glad to see it. At first, R2 stopped a safe distance from the panel and began to scan it, his dome rotating back and forth as he brought different sensors to bear: optical, thermal, radionic, electromagnetic. 3PO called out the results of each reading to the two men, who were watching from opposite sides of the passage. Lobot already knew the results by the time 3PO pronounced them, for the droid, on his own initiative, and without any notice to Lando, had opened another of his data registers to the cyborg's neural interface. It was a signal of support that Lobot accepted in silence, saying nothing that would betray the small mutiny. When the initial scans produced no obvious red flags, R2 moved in closer and extended his sensor probe. The scan head was too large to fit fully into the smaller sockets, but R2 brought it as close to the first of them as he could without actually touching it.
Yield 0 point 0 Gauss.
Said 3PO.
Flux density 1.602. Alpha rate 0. Beta rate 116. Charge polarity negative. R2, I don't understand a word of this. Will someone please tell me what it means?
R2 swiveled his head and emitted a sharp series of whistles, which 3PO did not translate.
I am trying to hold still.
3PO said, as R2 moved the probe to the next socket.
It's not my fault I wasn't designed for weightlessness. Most sensible beings live on planets where they belong.
The response from R2 sounded churlish even to Lobot's ears.
I don't care what you think.
3PO said.
Why, you're only a mechanic. I was meant for nobler purposes. I should be at a diplomatic reception, helping to forge peace between bitter rivals, arranging a dynastic marriage. How I miss the old days.
R2's response was an electronic bleat.
Very well, then.
3PO said haughtily.
See if I care. I don't need your help.
With that, the golden droid released his grip on R2's right tread support and folded his arms across his chest plate.
But I need your help, 3PO,
said Lando.
So stop squabbling with your brother and call out the numbers.
Why do you keep making that error, Master Lando? That egotistical little tyrant's no kin of mine.
3PO sniffed. I can help you, Lando, Lobot said quietly without explanation. Field 0.82 Gauss. Flux density 1.74. Alpha rate... Lando looked at Lobot with annoyance, a sight that gave Lobot surprising satisfaction. Neither of them saw 3PO reach out and clutch one of the projections on the panel to steady himself, but both heard a loud burst of static on the contact suit comm unit and saw a blue glow in the passage.
Gracious me,
3PO exclaimed. Quickly looking that way, Lobot saw that the end of the panel was crawling with blue-white snakes of energy. They were crackling between the tips of the projections, dancing up 3PO's arm nearly to the elbow joint, and rapidly growing more intense. 3PO, don't let go, Lobot began. The warning came too late. The moment his surprise abated, 3PO pulled back his hand in a reflex of squeamishness. An instant later, a massive, squirming bolt of energy leaped from the panel to 3PO's hand, flashed up his arm and one side of his head, and sprang from there to the face of the passage. Before anyone could react, it had raced away down the passage and disappeared, spreading as it went until it was dancing over the entire surface like a halo of blue fire. One finger of the bolt ran along the hand lines, leaving them crumbling into black dust in its wake. The bolt left 3PO convulsing and spinning in midair. His right arm was burned black and smoking from the servos and energizer controls. His head was frozen at an odd angle and quivering as though an actuator were caught in a feedback loop. Lobot loosed a string of curses he had forgotten he knew and started toward the injured droid. Lando stared dumbly for a moment, then did the same. But R2 beat both of them to 3PO, latching on and dragging him away down the passage in the opposite direction from the one the bolt had taken. As R2 passed Lando, the droid made a hostile noise.
I'm sorry,
Lando said, throwing his arms up in a gesture of surrender.
It's not my fault. Lobot, tell him it's not my fault.
Hastening up the passage after R2 and 3PO, Lobot jetted past Lando in purposeful silence. R2 would not allow Lando to approach 3PO. He had to content himself with watching from several meters away while Lobot and R2 hovered over the protocol droid and tried to assess the damage. From several meters away, the damage looked to be considerable. An R6 or R7 could have survived the jolt handily. The latest combat-rated droids were armored against power surges and induced currents up to and including a near-direct hit from a Class 1 ion cannon. But 3PO had been designed for wars of words. His buffers and breakers were minimal, and the bolt of energy from the panel had overwhelmed them. If the charge had passed across his body through the primary processors instead of up one side, 3PO would be dead. As it was, Lando could see that 3PO's right arm was rigid and useless at his side. The servo controllers burned and the linkages fused. Even worse, his speech synthesizer or vocal processor had been crippled. When he spoke, his voice phased and changed timbre, as though he were a million clicks away on a pocket comlink. Twice already he had halted in mid-sentence, as though stuck, searching for the most ordinary of words, something Lando had never heard him do before. After a few minutes, Lobot left 3PO with R2 and joined Lando. To Lando's surprise, there were no words of recrimination, only a businesslike coolness barely distinguishable from Lobot's usual demeanor. 3PO's arm is beyond repair. Given that we have no spare parts, Lobot said, R2 is trying to free the lateral actuator and restore freedom of motion to 3PO's head. He nodded past Lando at the equipment grid, which Lando had towed away from the scene of the accident. I need the toolkit.
In a moment.
Lando said.
What happened back there? Have you thought about it?
I need the toolkit, Lando, Lobot repeated, and moved to pass between Lando and the passage wall. Lando reached out and caught Lobot's forearm.
You were right about these passages. They're getting ready to...
Something moved at the periphery of his vision, and Lando's gaze flicked past Lobot to the droids, then past the droids to the growing glow where the passage bent out of sight.
Blast!
He exclaimed.
Hey, get away from the wall! Get away from the wall! R2, look out!
What? Lobot craned his head. Using his grip on Lobot's suit, Lando dragged him toward the center of the passage, just as the energy halo appeared at the horizon of their vision and sped toward them. It surrounded them for only a moment as it raced through on its course, but its passage made the hair rise on the back of Lando's neck. It's gone all the way around?
Yes.
Doesn't seem to have lost any strength at all, Lobot said in wonder.
No,
Lando said.
That's what I was trying to tell you. You were right. These are conduits, superconducting accumulators, perhaps even some sort of gas tube cascade generator.
For the weapons, Lobot said slowly. It has to be for the weapons.
That panel is the ballast, the source of the spark. 3PO created an arc path while it was building up to fire, probably prematurely. He may have caused the system to report a failure, buying us a little time as it resets.
The weapons are useless in hyperspace. That explains our reprieve.
It also answers your question about the panel, about why it showed up now.
Lando said.
Smart. She's a smart lady. The last thing I do before I enter an unfriendly room is check my weapon.
Testing the integrity of the system. She must be getting ready.
Wait,
Lando said.
Listen!
All at once, all around them, the ship began to groan and growl in a slow, deep voice. Lando released Lobot and dove toward the equipment grid, wresting the sensor limpet from its restraints. The limpet was secured in a harness of silk line with a single trailing cord ending in a loop.
I have to do this now!
Lando said.
R2! Map! What's the shortest way to the outer hull?
R2's reply was a squawk.
Point out the direction. I can't understand you.
He's not answering you, said Lobot. He's asking me why I'm not back with the tools yet. He closed his eyes. The lights on his interface blinked at a furious rate. Through there, he said. 18 meters. But I don't know what's between here and the hull.
I'll tell you when I get back,
Lando said. He drew his blaster, burned a hole in the direction Lobot had pointed, and was gone. With his thrusters holding his widely set feet against the outer bulkhead of the Vagabond, Lando pointed the cutting blaster down between his legs and squeezed the actuator. A perfect circle of hull vanished in a puff of gray smoke, which was instantly sucked out through the opening. The limpet had been floating freely, tethered to Lando's left wrist. Now it strained at the end of a taut line, rocking as the compartment's air rushed past it. Pocketing the blaster, Lando let the line play out through his gloved fingers until the limpet slipped through the opening. Only the cord on Lando's wrist kept it from escaping completely into space. Then he simply waited, watching the hull breech knit closed. When the opening had shrunk enough to prevent the limpet from being pulled back inside, Lando took up the slack and pulled the limpet back against the hull. Reaching through, he pressed the dual switches that activated the limpet's sensors and armed its attachment system. Letting a little line play out again, Lando waited until the hole had closed to the size of a peephole, then yanked the limpet toward him. There was an audible thwack as the crisscrossing anchor spines fired and drew the limpet flush against the hull. For insurance, Lando knotted the cord around the safety tab that had covered the limpet's switches, pulling it snugly against the interface. Lando hoped that even if the ship was somehow able to slough off the limpet's barbed anchor spines, the harness and improvised stop would keep it in place. That job accomplished, Lando turned away to examine for the first time the compartments he had crashed through en route to the outer hull. Unlike in the accumulators, where the entire face of the passage itself gave off a pale yellow glow, the only light in the outer compartment came from the twin ear lamps located on either side of Lando's helmet. When he swept their beams through the dark volume that enclosed him, a great emptiness swallowed the light forward, aft, and around the circumference of the ship. It was as if he were alone in the darkest corner of space. Only when he looked up, away from the outer hull, near which he hovered, and back the way he had come, did the light catch and reflect to him any of the substance of the ship. And what the light revealed there made Lando shiver with a chill no warmer could drive away. For the lamp showed that the inner wall was covered with alien faces, a collage, a portrait gallery, a mural, a memorial, stretching as far as the light could carry, and likely beyond. There were thousands of different faces, or thousands of variations on the same face, each gazing out from its own hexagonal cell. The faces were unlike any Lando had ever seen, and yet he keenly felt the intelligence in the large round eyes that seemed to seek him out. More than by any other gift, Lando had found his way by reading the faces of strangers and knowing them better than they knew themselves. He read in the sculpted, deeply lined faces of the Kella both strength and surrender, a settled wisdom and a thwarted curiosity, and most of all a terrible knowledge of the impermanence of life. The beings who had sat for these portraits and the artisans who had created them had known when they did so that these images might be all that survived them, and they had held nothing back. There was a circular gap in the mural where Lando had burned his way through it from behind. The supporting wall had healed, but the overlying portraits had not. 4 were damaged in varying degrees, 1 obliterated forever. Lando fought off sharp pangs of guilt as he jetted up toward the mural and reopened a hole at that same spot.
I'm sorry,
he said to the surviving faces as he left them behind.
but this is your tomb, your memorial. I'm trying to keep it from becoming mine. I like to think that if life meant this much to you, you'd be rooting for me to succeed.
Lando found the others where he had left them, still tending to 3PO. The golden droid was the only one to react strongly to his return, turning his head toward Lando and greeting him cheerfully.
Master Lando,
He said in a crackly voice. One glowing eye flickered.
What are you doing on Yavin? Why are you wearing that costume? Do you know? You look rather like a droid.
3PO, take a look around.
Lando said.
Do you recognize this place?
The droid's head swiveled.
Oh, yes.
I see.
The Killer Vagabond.
I seem to have.
Had an accident.
He turned and clanged R2 on the dome with his good arm.
And it was all your fault. You good for nothing, Saboteur. You belong in the waste compactor, along with all the other.
No,
Lando said sharply.
it was my fault. I gave the orders. I made the mistake. I'm sorry, 3PO. I promise you we'll get you put back to specs as soon as we get home.
I'm sure that my Prime Minister was the approximate corpse of my mishap,
said 3PO.
Don't try to talk, 3PO.
Lando said.
Just keep running your diagnostic. Your parser will map the damaged regions and relocate those functions.
Very well, Master Lando.
The droid's head returned jerkily to the neutral position. Lobot shook his head in sympathy. Lando, the test charge, if that is what it was, has been around 4 more times. I could see it weaken when it passed your new hole, but other than that, it did not seem to lose any strength at all. I expect that it would still be circulating if the panel had not reabsorbed it the last time it passed. Lando acknowledged the report with a nod.
These passages are a nearly perfect energy bottle,
he said.
This explains a lot about the power of their weapons. It must get pretty exciting when they're running a capacity charge through here.
I believe our consensus is that we have had enough excitement for now.
You're right. We need to get out of here. But there's something that has to be done first,
Lando said.
R2, I was able to place the limpet on the outside of the ship. I need you to pick up its signal and make it available to Lobot.
The little droid turned its dome away from Lando and remained mute.
R2, we need to find out where we are. Step 2 of our plan, remember? I don't know how long we can count on getting data from the limpet, and we don't know how long we'll be in real space.
Still, the droid was silent.
Lobot?
Lobot cleared his throat. R2 just said something rude to me about your leadership ability. Then he told me to tell you that he's on strike. Working to restrain a flaring temper, Lando said evenly,
R2, you're the only one of us who can receive the data from the limpet. If we don't have that data, we can't plan an escape. If we don't escape soon, we're going to run out of air, and you're going to run out of power. Is whatever point you're trying to make worth the 4 of us expiring?
R2 emitted one small beep. Receiving data, Lobot said. R2 said to tell you that he's doing it for 3PO, not for you.
I don't care if he does it for the Blood Prince of Thessalia, as long as it gets done,
said Lando.
How long will it take to get a navigation fix?
R2 is calculating the triangulation now, Lobot said. Lando, only 1 local star is in the spectral database. R2 is searching for other reference stars.
What? Where the frack are we?
1 moment, Lobot said. Coordinates 091066052. Uncertainty due to measuring error 2%.
Triple zeros? That can't be right. That would put us in Sector 1.
Correct, Lobot said. We are presently 106 light-years past the border of the New Republic, in the core. The nearest inhabited system is Prakith.
Prakith,
Lando repeated.
Fogga Brill.
Excuse me?
At last report, Prakith was controlled by the Imperial warlord Fogga Brill.
Prakith is 8 light-years away.
Are there any other ships out there? Any security buoys, drones, probes, anything?
None that the limpet can detect. However, the hull of the Vagabond blocks a substantial portion of the sky. Lando muttered grimly.
Well, we're sure not going to be putting out any calls for help in this neighborhood. All right, let's get out of this accumulator while things are still quiet. We'll go right back through where I just came out. I don't know quite where it puts us, but nothing bad happened the first time.
R2 trilled.
What?
Never mind, Lobot said. You don't want to hear. Lando thought dark thoughts about lax maintenance schedules and the consequences of letting droids go too long without a memory wipe. Your decision, Luke, but they've both got entirely too much personality for my taste. But he kept those thoughts to himself.
Once we're through,
He continued,
I'd like to see if we can avoid blowing any more holes in the walls.
Lobot nodded approvingly at that.
But that means one of us is gonna have to solve the puzzle of what a Keller door looks like and how to open it.
Lando said. Then he looked directly at R2.
So the first thing we're gonna do when we get over there is get 6 hours rest. All of us. I should have insisted on it sooner. I'm sorry, R2. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I never meant for 3PO to get hurt.
R2's dome swiveled back toward Lando. He said.
He told me to tell you that he is considering giving you a second chance,
said Lobot. Lando nodded, drawing the blaster from its pouch.
You tell him for me that that's all a smart player should need.
Chapter 4.
The nudge that finally awakened Lando was provided by a dehydration headache and a stomach knotted with hunger. The dream that lingered in his awareness was of being pursued through a dark city by a soft-voiced, unseen assassin, and he was eager to chase it from his senses. Reaching up, he switched his helmet lamps to the low setting and looked for the others. Lando found he was the only member of the team who was conscious. Lobot was floating near the wall below him, a few meters away. His arms were raised beside his face, and his legs drawn up and bent at the knees like a child's. R2 was still holding 3PO protectively with his grasping claws, and the duo spun slowly in the air at the far end of the chamber, as though dancing to music only they could hear. Glancing down at the controls on his left forearm, Lando checked the timer he had started before closing his eyes. He was startled to see that the 6-hour rest he had proposed had stretched to more than 16 hours. He and Lobot had both slept through their alarms, and the droids were still powered down, waiting for an awakening touch. For a moment he felt a flash of guilt over the lost hours, but he swept that away with the realization of how necessary the rest had been. The body knows what it needs, he thought, looking at Lobot's blissful expression. But sleep had not healed all the insults. Lando's hunger was keener than ever, and the water from the helmet pipe straw only spurred wishful thoughts about bottomless, ice-filled glasses of Charda and Skoa. More than anything, though, he wanted out of his contact suit. The air inside was decidedly rank, and his own breath came back to him off the sneeze-spotted faceplate as a foul cloud. His scalp and a half-dozen other unreachable places itched maddeningly. His skin felt greasy, and he craved a hot shower, and the suit was a prison preventing him from stretching out tight muscles and deep aches. The makeshift glove on Lando's right hand was clinging lightly to his fingers, a sign that the atmospheric pressure in the compartment was slightly higher than the one normal of the suits. Lando began fingering the helmet release with his other hand, absently betraying his thoughts. It's not as if there's anything poisonous in the ship's air. It's just a bit on the chewy side. I held my breath for 6 minutes once in a tank test. That's plenty of time to wipe my face and scratch my... Lobot's voice interrupted Lando's thoughts.
I would like to know, the cyborg said, which agency you used to make the arrangements for this vacation. The accommodations have not been up to expectations.
An easy smile creased Lando's face as he turned toward Lobot.
You're just cranky because I ate your complimentary breakfast while you were sleeping in.
Which is just one of several hundred reasons why I'm never traveling with you again.
Stop complaining and help me wake up the children,
Lando said.
I hear today's gonna be one of the highlights of the tour.
By mutual agreement, they activated 3PO first, so that Lando could have a few minutes to diagnose his status without R2's protective interference. It took only a short conversation with 3PO to discover that the droid had regained most of his verbal faculties, and with them most of his dignity.
All that remained of his vocal injury was a background buzz when he spoke, and an intermittent glitch in the speech synthesizer that resulted in various distortions in pitch.
3PO, I'm very glad your language systems came around,
said Lobot.
I may have to raise my estimation of Breton Engineering's cybernetic products. My first neural interface was from Breton, and I had nothing but trouble with it,
Thank you, Master Robot.
said 3PO.
I, too, am greatly relieved. A protocol droid with a malfunctioning synthesizer is hardly any use at all.
Unless you want to do business in one of the 9,057 sign languages.
Said Lando. The droid looked down at his damaged arm.
In my present condition, I would not be able to offer you even that service. If my synthesizer fails, I would be nothing but a burden to you. You might as well cannibalize my car cells and leave me behind. I understand.
We're not going to leave you behind, said Lobot. I don't want to have to depend on me to communicate with R2.
Why is that?
Lando asked.
You seem to be doing fine back in the passage.
Lobot shook his head slowly.
R2 thinks in that same binary polyglot he speaks, and I can't understand a bite of it. He can leave short messages in BASIC for me in his memory registers, but that limits us to whatever he knows of BASIC. And from what I've seen so far, he seems to have learned most of his BASIC vocabulary from a nerf herder.
Oh, he can be quite rude.
3PO agreed conspiratorially.
He constantly says the most outrageous things. You can't imagine.
I don't repeat
Half of his comments.
Sometimes I think that he means
To trick me into
embarrassing myself.
3PO looked past Lando to where R2 was floating at an angle, his standby lamp still glowing, and added worriedly,
He hasn't been damaged, has he?
No, he's just the last one up this morning.
Lando said.
I'm gonna take care of that right now.
Perhaps it would be better if I did it,
Lobot said, stopping him with a touch.
R2 may not have recovered from 3PO's accident as well as 3PO has.
Just how many diplomats are on this mission?
Lando asked lightly.
No, if R2 still has a problem with me, he can start getting over it right now. This is my mission, and I'm not handing it over to a petulant droid. No offense, 3PO.
I'm taken.
I'm sure.
Said 3PO.
I know exactly what you mean.
R2's system lights came on all at once, and his sensor dome rotated a half turn in each direction. Rising, he moved away from Lando and jetted toward 3PO, loosing an unusually long chatter of sounds.
What's he saying?
Lando asked. 3PO chattered back at R2 in the same dialect before answering, and R2 replied at even greater length.
Well?
A crackle of static made it sound as though 3PO had cleared his throat.
Master Lando,
R2 says
that he has the greatest enthusiasm and confidence
in the mission.
3PO?
Lando, I suggest you take it at face value,
Lobot said quietly. Lando looked hard at Lobot for a moment. Then, frowning, he said,
Thank you. I have trouble sometimes hearing clearly over what's not being said.
He reached for his control pad and brought his helmet lamps up to full brightness.
Lobot, is there anything going on outside?
All of the limpet sensors are clear. The Vagabond's forward speed is negligible.
Just another oblong asteroid drifting along a long way from anywhere, eh? All right then, R2, can you help us with some light? Let's see what we have here.
What they had was a chamber 15 meters long and 9 meters wide, and as infuriatingly seamless and featureless as the airlock.
Kinda have the feeling that I've been here before,
said Lando, scanning.
And I don't mean yesterday when I burned through here on the way to the hull.
I understand, Lobot said. Perhaps the highest form of art on Keller was the locked room mystery.
Lando laughed.
Which would make this ship their Hall of Fame anthology, I guess. But it wants for variety.
The apparent consistency of design principles should serve our interests. A grin appeared.
You want me to see if I can lose the other glove this time?
The Keller aesthetic demands that nothing be evident until it is needed,
Lobot said.
But how does the structure know when a concealed feature is needed? How do the Keller communicate their desires to their creations? We know at least one answer. We know that it responds to touch.
The grin faded to a frown.
The last time I touched this ship, It tried to leave us out as a meal for space slugs.
I am not convinced that this vessel means to do us harm.
What exactly would you consider compelling proof? A fatality?
I've been reconsidering the incident in the airlock in light of 3PO's accident, Lobot said. It's possible that we misinterpreted the message which R2 found in the airlock. It's possible that the control you activated was an emergency lock-close switch, which functioned exactly as intended.
What? No, that doesn't make sense.
It's even possible that we asked the vagabond to attempt an escape, Lobot continued. The prominence given to the symbology R2 detected parallels the use of red and yellow as alert and caution colors, and arrows as pointers in human artifacts.
You're saying that if 3PO could read Kella, we'd have seen a sign saying, "In case of emergency, pull here."
Lobot nodded. Isn't the most prominent marking on the outside of a snub fighter the canopy release? What if we walked up to one, knowing the meaning of an arrow, but unable to read the word rescue?
Here's the problem with your theory that we hit the panic button,
Lando said.
The next time this ship had a chance, it tried to spit us out again, without us ever getting near that control yoke.
That next time we were burning a hole in an element of the primary defense system, a hole that the repair mechanisms were unable to close in the usual amount of time.
I take your point,
Lando said.
But after we did that, the ship must have known we weren't Kella and we weren't friendly.
If the ship had the consciousness you attribute to it, and had formed an intent to remove us, it could have done so at any time while we were in the accumulator, said Lobot. It could have disposed of us while we slept just now. It could have opened the hull under your feet while you were placing the limpet. Yet it has done none of these things.
And what kind of security system would forget about us once we'd managed to break in, eh?
Lando said.
As though once we put our weapons away, we were no longer suspect. Terribly sorry, forgot our key code, had to blow up the entryway. Oh, that's all right. Come in and make yourself comfortable.
I've been asking myself from the beginning what kind of intelligence we were facing, Lobot said. It's the most interesting question before us.
I'm still going with, where's my next meal coming from?
Lando said.
And R2 would probably vote for who put him in charge anyway.
Lobot patiently waited out the interruption, then went on. I have projected how this ship would behave if you or I or R2 or 3PO were its master. Its real behavior does not match any of these models.
Pardon me, sir, but why should it?
Asked 3PO, who had been listening attentively.
This vessel is not built by humans or droids. We are not its masters. Its behavior can only be properly evaluated in the appropriate cultural context.
I disagree, 3PO. The conditions of the test dictate the form of the answers, said Lobot. If that were not so, the millions of species in this galaxy would have so little in common that there would be no need for your services.
He's got a point, 3PO,
said Lando.
No matter where I've gone or who I've been dealing with, the one thing that holds the deal together is that everyone's looking out for their own end. I call it enlightened self-interest, and it's the motor that powers the universe.
The conditions of the test are sentience and survival, said Lobot. The form of the answer is to identify and neutralize threats. This ship has failed the test. Therefore, I conclude this ship is neither sentient nor controlled by sentient beings. It is a work of great ingenuity, but it is not intelligent.
I see,
said 3PO.
Master Lando, should I discontinue my efforts to contact the masters of this vessel?
Just hang on, 3PO,
said Lando.
I'm still not sold on this. Lobot, a ship of this size and complexity, successfully evading capture for more than 100 years. There must be something or somebody in charge.
Something, yes, but not something sentient. I believe we were deceived by the apparent complexity into invoking a God hypothesis.
A god hypothesis?
Lobot nodded. When we spoke of the masters of this vessel, we assumed there was a consciousness observing us and controlling events in our environment, he said. We even turned to these masters to save us, respectfully offering entreaties and hoping for their intervention on our behalf. But there's no indication the ship is aware of us, beyond its local awareness of our effects on it. Its responses have the character of autonomic functions. I now believe the Vagabond is an automaton of great sophistication, employing rule-based responses incorporated into its fundamental structure.
What rule could it have been following when it tried to suck me out into space?
You were using a blaster, and caused a breach which did not heal, said Lobot. You could have triggered a rule specifying that fires be extinguished by exposure to vacuum. Lando's cheeks wrinkled as he weighed Lobot's argument.
So you want us to start pushing buttons at random, is that it?
We know it responds to touch. We were probably wrong to conclude that it responds negatively. Lando continued to vacillate.
Still quiet outside, R2?
R2 chirped a single beep. Recognizable as yes. Looking back at Lobot, Lando shrugged and gestured with an open hand.
After you!
Nodding, Lobot unlocked and removed his gauntlets one at a time, clipping them to tool stays on the contact suit. Then he jetted to the nearest part of the enclosing wall, reached out both hands, and pressed the palms lightly against the surface. When nothing happened, he started sliding to his left. The wall of the chamber began to rise under his hands, as though it were shaping itself to an invisible mold.
My goodness gracious.
3PO suddenly cried out,
R2,
Do you see?
Lobot retreated hastily to the middle of the chamber, but the transformation continued. Broad discs appeared and grew into squat cylinders. Ridges defined long arcs across the display, shadowing the rippled patterns spilling down the curves of a hemisphere. Color appeared but did not overwhelm. There were swirls of a pale blue and spikes of a soft yellow, and none respected the boundaries of the geometries they overlaid. Lando's eyes twinkled with delight.
I never thought you were the artistic type, Lobot.
Returning to the wall, Lobot touched the drum-like surface of one of the cylinders. The chamber was suddenly filled with music, a haunting duet of intertwined melodies that rose and fell like swells in a gentle sea.
I'm not letting you have all the fun,
Lando said with a grin, peeling the makeshift glove off his right hand and jetting to the opposite wall. It answered his touch with a great rectangle pierced by two long channels and filled with finer detail than the sculpture it faced. Lando did not know the meaning of the pattern, but he could see the scar his blaster had left in it. A circular bite out of the upper edge of the rectangle, obliterating 20 or more of the myriad smaller cells within it. The damage did not dampen Lando's enjoyment for long. The two men flew about the chamber like nimble, persistent insects until they had tested its entire surface. There was something marvelous about the way a simple touch of the hand brought the empty chamber to life. But the most splendid discovery of all, in Lando's eyes at least, was the doorway that opened for him at one end of the chamber, and its twin, which Lobot manifested at the other. Lando did not know where either might lead them, but he much preferred an uncertain choice to no choice at all. In the captain's wardroom aboard Glorious, two pieces of metal rested on a table beside a contact suit gauntlet. The longer of them was badly twisted. The ends of both were scorched with matching burns. Colonel Pakpakad held the shorter of the two lightly between two fingers, turning it over for examination.
You're certain?
He asked. Yes, Colonel, said Taisden. This is the frame of a hired-hand carryall, a common self-stabilizing equipment sled.
On a ship?
The registry code indicates it is the property of a Hirko Nochit, a Babbitt adventure guide and one-time acquaintance of Lando Calrissian. We believe that the General acquired this, and certain other property, from Nochit in a sabacc tournament 2 years ago.
Have you had it analyzed for biological identifiers?
It was swept immediately after retrieval,
said Technical Agent Plack.
There are trace markers consistent with human handling, but I cannot confirm that either Calrissian or the cyborg is the source.
Why not?
Sir, it's, a bit awkward. We have no bioprofile of the General to compare it to.
Picard bared his teeth.
A flag officer of the fleet. Say nothing of his history for joining the rebellion and since leaving it. How is this possible?
I don't know, sir. We have found records that indicate his bioprofile was recorded at least 3 times, but the profiles themselves have disappeared. And the Clerk of Records on Cloud City refuses even to answer our inquiries, citing something he called the Founder's Contract.
Shaking his head, Picard said,
Under his uniform, General Calrissian remains a smuggler and a scoundrel. Was anything else found in the sweep, Plack?
Yes, Colonel, though I don't know what significance to assign to it.
Tell me what you can.
Yes, sir. We recovered a relatively large amount of an unidentified biological material from the facing of the sled. This area here.
The agent said, pointing.
The quantity is on the order of 2 million cells. I should say cell fragments, because most were mechanically damaged.
Mechanically, as if these pieces had been used as weapons.
No, sir. The distribution was too uniform, more like... Well, sir, more like you'd sat down and sanded the outside of the frame with a rough skin rat. I'm sorry, sir. I know that's rather unscientific.
You said the cells were unidentified.
Yes, sir. And they may stay unidentified. The leading theory is that they may be artificial cells, a mechanism rather than an organism. The genetic sequences are much too short and seem to have little extra material. With your permission, we'd like to use one of Glorious's hyperspace probes to send a sample back to the Exobiology Institute on Coruscant.
Picard bared his teeth.
See to it, Lieutenant.
He growled.
It should have been done when you first thought of it.
The agent hurriedly left the room under the heat of Picard's glare, and the colonel turned his attention back to Taysden.
Was anything else recovered from the location where these were found?
No, sir. Nothing else. Stendoff is still on station, sweeping the area, but it looks clean down to decimeter resolutions. Picard picked up the short section of sled frame.
A most curious kind of flotsam, Agent Taysden. Difficult to construct a scenario to account for it.
Yes, sir.
Are all of our people off the Marauder now?
Yes, sir. The section came over with me, and Captain Garch had quarters assigned to them on X-Deck.
Then I suppose I have delayed as long as I can, hoping that these foolish orders would be withdrawn,
said Picard.
Advise Captain Hansa that I am releasing Marauder from this command, effective immediately. He is to return his ship at best possible speed to Krentner Sector Station and report to the Commodore there.
Taysden nodded. I'll see to it immediately, sir. Left alone in the wardroom, Colonel Picard slowly cupped his right hand and began to smack it against the table, driving his friction pads against the retracted points of his nails. The pain proved unequal to the anger he was wrestling, so he methodically increased both the force and frequency of the blows. There was an eerie deliberateness to his self-abuse, and his face remained expressionless throughout. He did not stop until the pads were swollen and pulpy soft, and the pain shooting up through his arm and deep into his chest had bled off the restless need that impatience and frustration had bred in his Padrock gland, the fighter's heart. By that time, Marauder was ready to depart, and Picard waited until he had watched it go, jumping toward Krenner the moment it cleared convoy radius. Then he turned to his recording log and began at last to dictate a report he did not want to make for a supervising committee he no longer could say he respected.
The little ships groping through the dark for a few short days. That is all your lives are worth to them. I never would have thought I would see such dishonor. I never thought I would feel such shame.
Over the next several hours, R2 added 20 chambers to his map of the Vagabond, numbering each in turn as the team visited it. To help them remember where they had been, he also recorded for each a fisheye hollow of what Lando had dubbed the pop-ups. So far, they had discovered 2 basic patterns for the pop-ups. 8 of the chambers were like the first. One side of the chamber would reveal a large figure that might have been a sigil, a sculpture, or symbolic writing. The opposite face would reveal a finely detailed geometric design that Lando and Lobot both were convinced was the map of a temple or small city. Somewhere in every map room was a key that triggered Kala music, though every song was different from the others. Apart from the music, the pop-ups in the map rooms appeared to be static. They remained on display as long as the team lingered. When the team moved on to another chamber and the connecting portal closed, the pop-ups collapsed and vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Next in sequence, after every map room, came one or more of what Lobot dubbed gadget rooms. In them, the team found a variety of mostly mysterious pop-ups that might move, change color, hum, or change shape when touched. But with a very few exceptions, the gadgets had no decipherable function, and none caused any detectable change in the status of the ship.
I still think these could be control rooms,
Lando said as they prepared to leave Chamber 20.
We just don't know what we're controlling. We could be driving the custodian crazy, lowering the heat in the freshers, and changing the channel on his Cosmicom service.
One welcome discovery was that when they entered a chamber by conventional means, through the portals, the chamber provided its own illumination. Power had become critical enough for R2 that back in Chamber 11, Lando had coupled him to 3PO for an energy transfusion. The protocol droid, carried everywhere by Lobot or R2, was consuming very little power directly.
Yes, by all means, you should take it on,
he said, looking down at his chest as Lando snapped the transfer cable into the recharge coupling.
I'm nothing but a burden to you. I don't know why you ever brought me on this mission. Master Lando, I'm completely useless to you. Give all my power to R2 and go on without me. Leave me here in the dark.
With a will, Lando resisted the temptation to take the droid at his word. Chamber 21 was another map room, the 9th. The sigil resembled a feathered V, embracing a cluster of fist-sized spheres. The map was an irregular pentagon, with one side twice as long as the others, and the same shape echoed in the open area at the very center. Neither Lobot nor Lando could find a music key, but their attempts seemed to trigger something quite different and startling. At first, there was just a pale pink glow, slowly pulsing in a structure near the long outer wall. Then, suddenly, that part of the map erupted in a gout of fire that leaped a full meter up from the wall. The team fell back in surprise.
They found us?
3PO cried.
R2, save yourself.
It's a holo, a recording, Lobot said.
No, it's real.
Lando said.
Look at your suit sensors. Wait, R2, don't!
He lunged toward the droid, who was busily unlimbering his fire extinguisher.
By the time the struggle was over, the entire map had been replaced by a 5-sided black scar, and the chamber was half choked by a white soot smoke. Lando herded them back into Chamber 20, where they waited the 2 minutes they had learned it took for a room to reset. When they re-entered 21, the black scar was gone, and with it the smoke. With their backs practically pressed against the sigil, they then watched a replay. The initial blast came from the same structure, after the same pulsing glow. As the pillar of fire rose, the shock rippled out through the rest of the city, destroying the neat symmetry. The fire quickly fell back, but spread into a firestorm that raced across the shattered city and consumed it. In a matter of seconds, the wall was scorched black as before, the map destroyed.
R2, please run an analysis on the atmosphere in here.
Lando said. 3PO reported the results.
Oxygen 5%, oxygen 8%, oxygen 11%. Would you make up your mind?
The droid asked, clanging R2 on the dome with his working arm.
It's not him, 3PO,
said Lobot.
The ship is restoring the chamber to its status before the fire for the next demonstration.
He looked to Lando.
These are history lessons. Something terrible happened to the Kala city that was under this sign.
Maybe this is our first clue about what happened to them.
Lando said.
But there's something else going on too. R2, what's the oxygen component now?
The answer, relayed through 3PO, was 15%.
Son of a... Lobot, 3PO, you stay here. R2, come with me. There's something we have to check.
Where are you going?
Back to Chamber 1, Express Lane. Sit tight. It won't be so long. We won't be sightseeing this time.
The patrol frigate Blood Price bore the colors of the Procketh Navy and the crest of Governor Foga Brill. Both were more prominent than the sigil of the Imperial Moff for Sector 5, which was consigned to the armor panel above the frigate's chin turrets. The displays mirrored the allegiances felt by Captain Ors Doggett and his crew of nearly 400. The officers owed their commissions and their postings to Brill, not to Grand Moff Gan. It was Brill who collected the commission fees and the annual posting assessments. It was Brill who paid off favors to wealthy families with command ranks that drew pay in goods and gold instead of Procketh scrip. The specialists and ratings, draftees all, owed the security of their families to Brill's promise of the protection of the Red Police for the daughters and wives of those who protected his power with their lives. To be drafted into the Navy was a far better thing than to be drafted into the slit mines or the foundries, or to be one of the hundreds rousted nightly from the riverbanks in Prahl and Scoth to dig their own graves. Graft and fear were inferior flavors of fealty, but they were the best Foga Brill could command, and they sufficed.
Course change maneuver complete, Captain, the navigator reported in a clear, loud voice. Now heading 90, mark. -45, mark. 22 at deep patrol standard.
Towmaster, report,
said Doggett. The listening array Blood Price towed behind it on deep patrol was 100 times longer than the ship itself. It was a spiderweb of passive antenna cables, tiny noiseless amplifiers, steering jets, and tension vanes, with a drag gondola the size of a troop transport at the end of the antenna's main cable. The 3 crew members in the gondola had the difficult job of flying the array through the turn when Blood Price changed heading. If there was too little tension, the elements could tangle, or the whole array could tear itself apart in what the manuals called dynamic destabilization, and tow crews called tail whip. If there was too much tension through the turn, the likely result was an overstrain disconnect, and a 2-hour delay for the recapture procedure. The towmaster on Blood Price's last patrol had allowed 2 disconnects. Along with the gondola crew, he had spent the last half of the patrol in the brig, awaiting the return to Procketh and a court-martial on a charge of treasonable incompetence. So it was with great relief that his replacement announced, "The array turned cleanly and deployment is nominal."
Very well,
said Doggett.
Lieutenant Sojus, you are master of the bridge. I will be in my quarters, working on crew reviews. Inform Yeoman Kligo that she is to report to me there immediately.
Yes, Captain. When the portal closed after Lando and R2, Lobot watched, fascinated, as the smoke thinned and disappeared, the scar faded and vanished. Even the tiny white bits of soot smudging the outside of his faceplate seemed to evaporate. He watched on his suit monitor as the temperature plummeted 30 degrees to the slightly chilly norm for the vagabond.
Pardon me, Master Lobot.
Yes, 3PO, what is it? Lobot said automatically, still distracted.
I was wondering, sir, if you could tell me, do droids meet the conditions of the test?
Lobot's head snapped around. What did you say?
The test of intelligence.
3PO repeated.
Am I sentient, like you, or simply another work of great ingenuity, like this ship?
Taken aback, Lobot looked away from the droid's waiting face as he groped for an answer. 3PO, you know, most droids are built to have self-aware artificial intelligence, especially third-degree droids like yourself.
But that must be something different than sentience.
3PO said.
Otherwise, the Senate of the New Republic would not consist solely of organics served by droids.
It is different, Lobot said, as gently as he could. Artificial intelligence is programming. Wipe a droid's memory and it disappears. Replace it with different programming and a translator becomes a tutor, or a med droid becomes a chem droid.
I understand, sir,
said 3PO. He was quiet for a long moment.
Then can you tell me how it feels to be sentient? How is it different from what I feel?
I'm not sure that I can say, Lobot replied slowly.
Perhaps it is a thing that you just know, because you are an organic and not a machine. Perhaps if I were sentient, I would not need to ask you these questions. I would know who I was.
Lobot said nothing for a time. What do you think, 3PO? He asked at last.
I do not know, Master Lobot,
the droid said.
But I have noticed that when someone speaks of memory wipes, I am seized by an inexplicable panic.
I don't find that inexplicable, said Lobot.
Really, sir?
Self-preservation is an elementary part of self-awareness, even artificial self-awareness. It's the part of us that feels that awareness which matters to us, Lobot said. I expect you would give that up. He pointed at 3PO's immobile arm, to keep your programming intact, as I would surrender this. He pointed through his faceplate at his neural interface, to preserve my consciousness.
I do not recall having this reaction when I was younger, sir,
3PO said.
Why, I have seen many droids of my acquaintance taken for memory wipes. I felt nothing but gratitude that their masters cared enough for their well-being to schedule proper maintenance.
The droid cocked his head.
My own maintenance record, I'm afraid, is something of a horror. It's a miracle that I can still function at all.
Lobot mused on that answer for a while. Just out of curiosity, 3PO, have you thought about asking other droids what they think about this?
Yes, Master Lobot,
3PO said.
But they seem not to understand the question. Why? One even had the manners to call me a computational defective with deviant specifications. Can you imagine?
I know something of such prejudice, said Lobot, then sighed. I don't have any answers for you, 3PO. All I can say is that the questions would seem to be worth revisiting when some time has passed.
Thank you, Master Lobot,
said 3PO.
I will do so.
Except for blind spots caused by blood price and the drag gondola, the towed array could scan several light hours in every direction. As the outermost of Procketh's 3 concentric spheres of defense, the first purpose of the deep patrol was to detect possible military threats long before they could come near the planet. For that reason, the ship's patrol route took it through the most likely final staging areas for an attack on Procketh, outside the range of its ground-based and orbiting sensors. But an equally important purpose was to intercept and claim as a prize any merchant or private vessel unwary enough to pass within reach. Ship seizures were not only an obligation, but an opportunity. A rich enough prize could advance the entire crew to a better post. And every deep patrol captain knew stories of other captains who had come home with a prize rich enough to earn the favor of Foga Brill himself. So, when Captain Doggett was called away from his examinations of the new female crew members, and saw the size of the contact on the optical displays, he quickly forgave the interruption.
What identification have you made?
He asked, peering over the shoulder of the security master.
None so far,
said the officer.
The image is too crude, and the target is silent in all spectral bands except the optical.
Interrogate the navigation transponder.
There is no transponder response at that location.
Range?
3.8 light hours, nearly at the limit of detection.
Captain Doggett weighed the possibilities. A warship of that size would be more than a match for a patrol frigate. He would need reinforcements from the inner fleet. But a freighter of that size would be a prize of the first rank, and one he would much prefer not to share with other captains. For a brief moment he considered cutting the array adrift, rather than allowing the hour necessary to reel it in. Abandoning the array would ensure that Blood Price was the first ship to reach the target. But if the contact proved spurious, or the target escaped, the loss of the array, or even any substantial damage to it, would cost him his post, if not his life.
Bring in the array.
Captain Doggett ordered.
Prepare the ship for hyperspace. Notify Patrol Command that we are in pursuit of an unidentified contact. Vector 091-066-053.
The navigation master turned at his station.
But, sir, the last coordinate for the contact is 055.
I am sure you are mistaken,
Doggett said evenly.
Communications Master. Send the message as I instructed. Patrol Command will want to send additional ships to support us. Navigation Master. What would an error of 2 degrees over this distance mean?
The
ships would be hours away at sublight, but too close to safely microjump.
understanding belatedly came to his eyes, and he glanced down at his console.
Yes, sir. 053. Thank you for catching my error before it had any undesirable consequences.
Sleeping on the job again, I see. Did you know that you snore like a power saw in Ironwood?
Lando's voice, sharp and clear in the helmet's comm speakers, startled a dozing Lobot awake. He looked up to find Lando and R2 back in Chamber 21, the portal quickly closing behind them. Lando was holding his helmet under his arm and grinning broadly.
Lando, what are you doing?
Master Lando, have you gone mad?
3PO demanded in alarm.
You must replace your helmet immediately, or you'll suffocate.
I've had it off for most of an hour now,
said Lando.
Didn't you wonder how anything could burn in an atmosphere that was 90% nitrogen and carbon dioxide?
It seems I did not have the necessary data to wonder, said Lobot, and I was thinking about other things.
Well, the answer is, it can't,
said Lando.
What I had to find out was whether it was just this room that had been oxygen-enriched.
And it apparently wasn't.
No, something happened while we were sleeping. Every chamber back to number 1 now has a breathable atmosphere. Go on, take your helmet off, try it.
The air was cold, dry, and sweet in Lobot's lungs. He looked at Lando in puzzlement.
Why should this be?
You said it first. This ship isn't out to harm us. It was expecting visitors.
But we took a wrong turn after we entered,
Lobot said thoughtfully, scratching his bald head with vigor.
We weren't supposed to be wandering through the weapons system, which has its own specific environmental needs. We were supposed to be going through the museum.
Which was in cold storage until we arrived,
said Lando.
It makes perfect sense. Oxygen is highly reactive, a reducing agent, keeping the oxygen pressure low and the carbon dioxide high protects the ship from fire, the exhibits from corrosion. Imperial Star Destroyers flood key equipment compartments with an NCO2 mixture before going into battle.
Then what happened to all the carbon dioxide that was in the air? Scrubbers?
The original and best kind,
Lando said.
The ship breathed it in, locked up the carbon, and gave back the oxygen. Lobot, don't you see? This ship is alive.
On Captain Dogut's orders, the Blood Price began charging its primary ion cannon battery immediately after exiting hyperspace. There would be no negotiations, no warning shots, no demands for surrender. Dogut did not intend to allow the captain of the intruding vessel any latitude at all. Unless a closer look at the target showed it to be a friendly, or a warship of cruiser class or heavier, Dogut intended to use the big guns quickly. The talking could begin after his gunners had disabled the other ship. "Target acquired," called the gunnery master. 20 seconds to full charge. "Target is confirmed unknown," called the senior analyst. "Design class is unknown. Estimated displacement class Gamma Plus. Detecting no weapons ports forward." "Target real velocity is 52 meters per second," called the navigation master. "Target closing velocity is 1,816 meters per second." Captain Dogut studied the image on his command display. It seemed almost too good to believe. A huge, unarmed, and unprotected vessel barely crawling through space.
Are there any other Prakith vessels on the board?
"Showing the light cruiser Gorath and the destroyer Tobe, approximately 20 million kilometers astern," said the navigation master. "They won't be here for a while."
Very well.
Dogut said.
Then we must do what we can ourselves. Gunnery master, you may fire when ready. Ion batteries only. I want that ship disabled, not destroyed. Troop master, prepare your units for boarding.
Lando and Lobot had both temporarily shed their contact suits to stretch, scratch, and even scrub away their accumulated annoyances, sacrificing some of their precious water to restore a measure of dignity and comfort. The convenience of the waste management facilities in the suits alone dictated that they would eventually climb back inside them. As a practical matter, they also couldn't afford to sacrifice the maneuvering and communication systems. But neither man was eager to give up his unexpected freedom. The pieces of both suits floated around the chamber like dismembered corpses, while R2 and 3PO looked on, nonplussed by the display.
Pardon me, Master Lando, but should we not continue searching for the vessel's control room? I do not see that this has significantly altered our situation.
R2 suddenly began squawking shrilly.
I'm talking to them now. R2,
said 3PO.
Just you wait your turn. What? There's another ship? Heading directly toward us. R2, we're saved. I knew that the Colonel would come for us.
Slow down, 3PO. What's going on?
R2 says that the sensors on the limpet are detecting another ship on an intercept course.
Grabbing his helmet as it floated by, Lando shot a worried look toward Lobot.
What ship? Ask him what ship.
The holoprojector, Lobot interrupted. R2 can relay the signal from the imager. A few seconds later, half the chamber was filled with the limpet's wide-angle view of space outside the Vagabond's hull. The approaching ship was clearly visible to the extreme left of the projection, toward the bow.
Imperial escort frigate,
Lando said immediately.
The original KDY design with the heavy stuff forward. It looks like the gun ports are open, too.
Shouldn't we signal it somehow, Master Lando?
Asked 3PO. It's not from our armada, 3PO, said Lobot.
The only signal I want to send that ship is a wave goodbye,
said Lando, reaching out and touching the wall of the chamber.
Come on, old lady, don't wait around for an introduction.
Master Lando, R2 says that there are 2 other ships approaching as well, but much farther away. Perhaps one of them is Glorious.
Not coming from that direction, it isn't. Oh, hell!
The bow of the onrushing frigate had suddenly disappeared behind the yellow-white plasma bubble of an ion cannon burst. A fraction of a second later, the hollow projection turned a crackling white, then disappeared. R2 yelped unhappily. At the same time, the ship shuddered under them. "The limpet's been fried," Lobot said, spinning in midair as he struggled to pull the lower half of his contact suit up over his legs. R2 isn't getting anything from it now. Lando pressed his palm against the wall, hoping to feel the tremor of a hyperspace jump beginning.
Of all the luck, what's going on?
He demanded.
Why is she waiting so long to jump?
They fell silent as one, listening to the ship, hoping to hear her sinews groaning in protest as the jump engines punched her across into hyperspace, and fearing any sounds that might mean their journey would be ending here, a long way from home. The captain of the cruiser Goroth was cursing the name of the captain of the frigate Blood Price even before his ship's forward scanners lit up with the glow of a battle begun. When he saw the frigate open fire on the strange vessel, his fury knew no bounds.
I swear, this man will dig his own grave, and I will see his children bury him alive there,
the captain said with an icy venom.
He will hear his daughters screaming, his mother pleading, while his lungs fill with dirt and his eyes are ground blind by sand.
They were too far away, the image too jumpy and coarse to tell what effect Blood Price's barrage had had on its target. But they were close enough to witness what followed. Together with the crew of Tobey, they were the only witnesses. The great hull of the target brightened fore and aft, and something almost invisible struck out across the emptiness toward Blood Price. Seconds later, the frigate exploded with a ferocity that could only mean the ionization reactor had gone critical. It vanished from the sensor displays.
Too quick for you,
the captain of the Goroth said coldly. Meanwhile, the intruding vessel was turning away from the shattered hulk, away from Procketh and toward the rim.
Notify Tobey to prepare for hyperspace. Propulsion master, ready on my mark,
the captain cried out.
We will erase this humiliation and capture this invader ourselves.
A bright circle of light flared out around the vagabond.
Now,
the captain screamed.
Match headings. After them!
The captain's crew was well trained to his voice. Goroth jumped into hyperspace close enough behind the vagabond to be able to detect her quarry ahead by its soliton wake.
Now! We have them,
the captain said with grim satisfaction.
Wherever they are going, we will be there. They are ours.
Colonel Pakpakat's new orders read simply,
Mission terminated effective your receipt this notice. Break off all operations immediately. NRI Operations Center.
This will not do,
he said, and swept out of his quarters. The threat ruffles blossoming down his back and the crimson expanse on his throat warned away any who might otherwise have tried to speak to him on his way to the bridge.
Secure channel isolation,
he said as he dropped his body into his combat lounge. The enclosing shell came forward from the back of the chair and closed him in.
NRI Operations Center, Coruscant's highest priority.
It took several seconds for the hypercom link to be made and verified.
Operations?
Said a briskly professional voice.
Go ahead, Colonel Pakpakat.
I need to talk directly to General Riken.
I'll see if he's available, Colonel. One moment.
Pakpakat's impatience made the wait seem longer than it was.
Brigadier Colomus, Operations Senior Staff,
said a new voice.
How can I help you, Colonel?
Pakpakat showed his teeth.
You can help me talk to General Riken, as I asked.
General Riken is not available at the moment,
said Colomus.
If you have any questions about your orders, I should be able to resolve them. I was in the planning loop for the Telcon expedition.
I know who you are, Brigadier,
said Pakpakat.
When General Riken becomes available again, please advise him that his last orders were garbled. In transmission, I will require a verified voice confirmation to proceed.
I can give you that, Colonel.
No, sir. I'm afraid you cannot.
Kube-McDowell relaxed into the cushions and left the isolation shell up. The callback came 24 minutes later.
General Riken,
Kube-McDowell said with an acknowledging nod. Colonel, Brigadier Columnist tells me that you have a problem with your orders, which for some reason only I can resolve. Would you care to explain what's going on?
sir, I must contest the decision to terminate the mission. This is a betrayal of...
Colonel, this is not open for discussion.
There are 6 men dead and a contact team still missing.
Colonel, those facts are not relevant to the decision.
Not relevant, you.
No, Colonel, they are not. All agents must be considered expendable, always, and your ships are needed elsewhere, most especially Glorious.
With all due respect, sir, you don't understand the ramifications.
Colonel, I wouldn't finish that sentence. Riken said sharply. Your reports have been carefully reviewed. The probability of any positive outcome at this point doesn't justify further investment. The decision has been made, and your exception is noted. The mission is terminated. Bring them home, Colonel.
Sir, I request permission to take an all-volunteer team and continue the search in General Kalashin's yacht. Lady Luck, this would not...
Denied.
Then I request immediate leave in order to continue the search on my own.
Denied. All leaves have been cancelled due to the crisis in Farthak sector.
Then you leave me in an impossible position.
Why is that, Colonel? Do you find it impossible to follow orders? Kube-McDowell bared his teeth.
General, a Hotek does not leave the bodies of comrades in the hands of the enemy, ever.
For the first time since the call had begun, there was silence. I understand, Colonel, but I can't help you.
I think you can, General.
I'm listening.
You said that all agents must be considered expendable. I am asking you to count me among the missing from the Telchcon expedition. Because even if I did return, I would still be here in ways which would compromise my ability to do any other job for you.
This is that important to you, Riken said, settling back in his chair. Even though these missing men were not part of your command, flouted your orders, and are principally responsible for the failure of your mission.
Once comrades and allies do not come neatly out of a mold, General,
Kube-McDowell said,
they are inevitably a mixed lot, and never without flaws. And I find I often must hope for as much tolerance from them, in that regard, as I am able to offer to them.
Riken pursed his lips. Very well, Colonel. I will extend you a little tolerance. Lady Luck, no more than 3 additional volunteers, and whatever unexpended mission supplies you choose, and the yacht can carry. Report any substantive developments promptly. And, Colonel...
Sir.
My tolerance is fairly inelastic. Don't try to stretch it.
Thank you, General.
Slightly more than an hour later, Kube-McDowell, Captain Bijo Hamax, and technical agents Pleck and Taysden watched from Lady Luck's tiny flight deck as the cruiser Glorious and the escort Ketamore turned together and jumped toward Coruscant.
It begins,
said Kube-McDowell to the empty sky. Penga Rift found the pilot of IX-26 keeping a lonely watch over the bodies on Malta Obex. What took you so long? He demanded. You were supposed to be here days ago. Copy. This is Johto Eccles, came the reply. Sorry about the delay. Frankly, we weren't even expecting you to still be here. Our original sponsor withdrew just before we lifted, and then we got word about the accident. We were going to have to go to a contract ambulance to recover Kraddock and Josala when another sponsor came along and picked up the contract. This is all news to me, the pilot said. I don't know why I wasn't recalled if the NRI pulled out. Who's sponsoring you now? A private collector, name of Jason, said Dr. Eccles. He hopes to authenticate some Keller artifacts. I think he's going to be disappointed, and very expensively so, but it helps us, and we'll do what we can for him. Do you still have a good fix on the bodies? Affirmative, Banga Rift, said the pilot. Nothing's moved down there since the avalanche, unless you want to count the snow that's fallen on top. You're in for a cold dig. We're ready for one. Then tell me how you want the data, so I can light this candle and get out of here, the pilot said. Because this is hands down the creepiest duty I've pulled in 16 years, and I have a great need to get myself somewhere warm and crowded. And soon. Understood, said Eccles. Ready to receive your coordinate system reference data. We'll take the next watch here at Maltha Obex.